that in the near term, I think this investment is probably quite good for jobs as we're building out the infrastructure. And over the long term, my best guess is that this will improve American productivity and will improve the real wages and will help us on full employment. But between the short term and the long term, it can have a disruptive effect. And we're attuned to that. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to shed some new light on it with some outsiders.
My time is up, but I will submit one question for the record around the issue of indexing our regulatory thresholds. We've seen so much growth in the since 2019 that our institutions might need to see a little recalibration on the thresholds that we have put upon them. Ranking Member Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the Federal Reserve has long been plagued by a culture of corruption and coziness with Wall Street. Over the last 5 years, at least 6 senior Fed officials have been implicated in serious ethics scandals related to personal stock trading and self-dealing. But instead of trying to repair this broken culture, I'm concerned that you seem to be embracing it. At the time of your nomination, you owned more than $100 million worth of shares in private investment vehicles called the Juggernaut Funds and THSDFS LLC. And you refused to disclose the underlying assets to the Senate and to the public. You say now that you've sold those shares. In other words, somebody wrote you a check for more than $100 million days before you entered office. Chair Walsh, who wrote that check?
Senator Warren, this is a discussion you and I had in the public square 7 weeks ago, and I'm thrilled to tell you that I have fully honored the obligations I had under the agreement I had with the Office of Government Ethics.
Yeah, I'm
there is
glad you
continued
did,
disclosure, which I'm happy to make as consistent with the agreement.
I asked you a very specific question. Who gave you $100 million right before you were sworn in? Was it a billionaire who has business with the Fed? Was it Stanley Druckenmiller, who's made billions of dollars betting on what the Fed does? Or was it a different billionaire? Who gave you the money?
I will fully comply with the Office of Government Ethics.
That's not an answer.
Well, it is an answer, actually, Senator, because
No,
there are
not.
obligations,
It's
and I will satisfy them
$100
completely.
million that you got just before you were sworn in, and you won't tell the American people where it came from. Let's go to another incident. As you know, the Fed imposes a blackout period where senior Fed officials are prohibited from talking about economic issues with outsiders. The idea is to, quote, reinforce the public's confidence in the transparency and integrity of the monetary policy process. In other words, no one gets some special insider information from the Fed. But shortly after your first FOMC meeting as chair, right in the middle of the blackout period, the Fed's vice chair for supervision, Michelle Bowman, was reportedly the featured guest at a secret dinner hosted by Bank of America for its hedge fund and Wall Street clients. At this closed-door dinner, she reportedly spoke about both monetary policy topics and regulatory policy. Now, I've called on the Inspector General to review her conduct, but you're the guy in charge. As chair, you set the tone on culture. Did Vice Chair Bowman provide any non-public information to the attendees at that secret dinner or discuss any regulatory policy matters that are subject to open comment periods?
Senator, I agree with one of the premises of your question, which is I do set the culture.
Good.
After my very first week at the Fed, I sent a letter to the 21,000 people at the Fed outlining our culture.
I appreciate that, but we have very limited time and a very strict chairman. So can you just answer the question about the vice chair and her secret meeting?
Sure, I'm happy to the extent I can share it with you. The vice chair has been an excellent colleague in my first 7 weeks. I'm aware of the letter you sent to the Inspector General. Out of an enormous respect for him, his investigation, what he chooses to do with it, I'm going to leave to him to do without trying to micromanage that.
So you
and I'd be interested in the judgments that he comes to.
So you will support his investigation. Have you made your own investigation? Did you ask her? if she spoke at a secret meeting during the blackout period?
I agree with the suggestion that the Inspector General is an independent actor, and
I
I'd be
know.
very
You're the
interested
guy
in
in
his
charge.
decision.
You just said you're the guy in charge. Did you ask her about the secret meeting that took place? Did you ask her?
I can answer a simple question, which is I wasn't at the meeting. I
understand
don't know the
that.
facts.
No one
but I'd
thinks
be
you were.
very
Did
interested
you
in the
ask
fact
about
finding
the
being
facts?
done by an independent Inspector
Did you care
General.
enough to ask, how can you be chair and not ask your own vice chair whether or not she violated the blackout period, violated the law?
I think it'd be inappropriate for me to prejudge facts that are being discovered
I
by
don't
an
know how you
independent actor.
prejudge them if you don't ask.
Well, I don't know how to prejudge them if I wasn't in the
So just
attendance
tell
of a
me,
meeting.
did you ask?
She's been an excellent colleague.
Did you
We've-
ask?
I've asked her a lot of things
Did you
about
ask?
supervision and regulation
Yeah,
because
I
we've been
think
busy
that's one
doing
more
a lot of
question
real
you
work
don't
over
wanna
the last
answer.
7
I
weeks.
gotta say, I'm gonna take the same time you did. I just gotta say,
You hope so.
the tone that you are setting is one that seems to invite corruption, and that's going to be a real problem.
Mr.
Thank you.
Brown.
We've had 7 weeks, Senator Warren, and we've set a tone of performance, accountability, responsibility, and integrity.
Senator Rounds has
already-
the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Warsh, welcome to your first meeting.
Thank you, Senator.
Let me give you an opportunity. I think I've got some questions that I think are important with regard to the Basel III and what we're going to do with it. But before we get into that, I think you've been basically harassed a little bit in terms of making accusations to you. Let me give you just a minute to perhaps respond in a just straightforward manner to some of this stuff. Anybody give you $100 million?
No, Senator, no one did any such thing.
Possible that you may have had assets that were sold based upon an agreement that you had as you became the nominee for the chairmanship?
Yes, I had earned assets over a long period of time and went over and above any ethics agreements and have sold or in the process of selling, have nearly completely sold everything that I had earned during that period and have rolled those into the equivalent of cash and T-bills.
So basically, away from investments based upon the market and back to treasuries.
Yes, exactly right. I thought that that was the prudent thing to do, given the responsibilities and the importance of setting the tone at the top. Culture is the big driver of a lot of things, and in my first 7 weeks, Senator, we're doing our very best in the best of the Fed's traditions to get the culture right, to get the strategy right, and to get policy right. And if we can do those things, all of which are to the left of the decimal point, might not be of such great interest to people that are trading on Wall Street, then I think the decisions we make to the right of the decimal point can be better, so we can do a better job of fulfilling the mandate you gave us.
Yeah, the ranking member had asked a question with regard to another member on the committee, Nikki Bowman, and you indicated that if there was an accusation being made as to an inappropriate meeting, that if the Inspector General was doing it, that you were going to be hands off on it. It seems to me that that's pretty appropriate, because if you would have gotten involved in it, the accusation from some members on this committee would have been that you were trying to influence it.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the logic? Am I on the right track with regard to the reasoning that you have for allowing the Inspector General to do the job that they were asked to do in the first place by members on this committee?
Yes, Senator, you're exactly on the right track. I'll just say more broadly that my fellow governors, my Reserve Bank presidents, they've received me incredibly warmly. I admit that I show up with a lot of ideas for reform in monetary policy and supervision and regulation and payments. I've only been there a short while, for 7 weeks, but instead of an institution acting inert, what I've found is my colleagues are really open-minded to change. What I found is we're going to have a good family fight. I'm not imposing ideas. That's part of the idea of the task forces the chairman referenced. But we're going to try to be better at our jobs, fulfill our mission, be accountable, be responsible, and do it all with the utmost integrity. That's my intention. We're early into this. I don't want to prejudge outcomes. We made a lot of progress in a short period of time, and frankly, I'm proud of it.
I like the idea that you're putting together working groups. I think that will give an opportunity for a fresh look at a lot of things going on. As I shared with you in a phone call earlier, it's not a matter of being necessarily vindictive or angry with previous chairs or previous members. It's a matter of making things better for the American people, and that's really what we ought to be talking about today. So let me just, in the minute and 14 seconds that I've got left on mine, let me talk a little bit about Basel III in particular. I think you and Vice Chairman Bowman and the respective financial regulators, I think you've done a good job in terms of your roles with regard to the Basel III re-proposal that was issued this March. The 2023 proposal would have substantially increased common equity capital requirements for Category 1 and Category 2 banks by approximately 19%, failing to strike a balance between maintaining resiliency of our banking system and doing so without hampering lending. I think this is a really critical item, and next to what artificial intelligence is going to do in terms of our productivity, I think it's one of the biggest issues out there. With the June 18th comment deadline now behind us, are there any other categories of feedback that you're weighing more heavily than others, such as the adjustments to leverage ratios or anything along that line? And if I could, is there going to be a go-live date this year sometime? Any idea when you might actually be able to talk about when this thing is going to go public for us?
Senator, well, thank you for your question on supervision regulation. As I mentioned before, I've shown up with a lot of ideas for reform, not just in monetary policy, but in supervision and regulation too. When I was before this committee some 20 years ago, there was a debate about what the Basel process should be. Boy, we should get to the bottom of that 20 years later, and we should end up with a set of reforms in the United States that makes our financial system and our banks safer, sounder, and more competitive. It is that competition which provides better and more agile credit to the real economy. The Basel endgame, Senator, is not America's endgame. I am happy to work with international regulators to try to find common views, but we're going to do the right thing for the U.S. economy. As you mentioned, we're out for public comment. I'll be very interested in the comments before we go final with the proposed final rule.
Let me just say, this is already off to a good start. But we're going to stay around 5 minutes, period. Thank y'all. Senator Reid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Walsh, I want to see if I put a cap on this discussion between Senator Warren and Senator Rounds. When will you disclose who brought your assets? When?
I believe there's periodic requirements under the ethics laws, and I'll fully comply with them. I think the next reporting requirement is at some point in the next quarter or so.
And you will fully disclose who you sold your assets to?
I'll fully comply with the law and the ethics agreement.
Thank you. AI is making a huge impact on everything we do, particularly the banking system. And as you're aware, an interagency governmental group, Commerce, Treasury, Energy, et cetera, has authorized the major banks, the 8 major banks, to use Mythos to evaluate their security. Would you agree that it's important for all financial institutions to have access to these types of AI tools so that they could analyze their operations for cyber vulnerabilities?
Yes, I think the broad financial system has new vulnerabilities with these new technologies. I wouldn't want to just isolate Mythos, though. The other large language models have rival products. The changes, the efficient frontier has changed even in the last month. But as these new models find their way more broadly, our banking system and frankly the Federal Reserve needs to do all we can to patch any vulnerabilities that we have.
What are you doing to ensure that these mid-size and smaller banking institutions have access to whatever AI tool is appropriate as quickly as possible?
Yeah, so I share the sentiment, Senator Reid. We are not the deciders as to who has access, but I have not been shy in sharing my views with authorities across the government about the vulnerabilities and have been asking for access, not just for the Federal Reserve, but for other institutions, to a whole range of these new artificial intelligence models so that they can protect themselves. If you said to me, what worries you over the course of the next several months, I want to make sure that we're as protected as we can be from foreign actors that want to do us harm.
Well, let me stay with AI, but change the focus a moment. Recently, Governor Waller and New York Fed President John Williams have warned that AI investments may be increasing inflation, and many economists have similar warnings. So are AI investments current drivers of inflation?
This is one of the good family fights. Let me give my own view on it, which might be somewhat nuanced from the way you just described it and some of my colleagues. The shock of AI, the supply shock of AI, has an effect on demand and supply. We see the effect on demand much more quickly. We see it in the capital investment I referenced. We see it in the prices of chips that are going up. We're inferring, which is just a fancy word for guessing, when the effects will happen on the supply side of the economy. I don't view a one-time change in prices as necessarily being inflationary, because I think there's a supply response. In that way, this is different from a foreign conflict and what it might do, which tends to reduce the supply side of the economy. Will it increase measured prices over the course of the next 12 months? I suspect it will be. But whether that's inflationary or not, that's up to the Federal Reserve, and we're going to have something to say about that.
Okay. Now, one of the interesting things about our economy is becoming more and more productive. But one of the disappointing things is that household pay is not rising relative to that productivity. And we're seeing less benefit from productivity gains. So what's driving this trend?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have a perfect answer to it. Like you, we think a lot about real take-home pay. The part that the Fed can do a lot about is the real part. If inflation were lower, real take-home pay would be higher. That's just the arithmetic. Your other question's a broader one, which is what are we going to see the productivity improvements lead to a surge in wages? Wages have moved up at a reasonable pace, but it's likely that as productivity moves up more, we should see wages move more. Getting that timing right, understanding when that happens, that's a puzzle, and it's a puzzle we're going to continue to work on.
In the last 10 seconds, will AI eliminate jobs at a catastrophic rate?
So you're asking me to prejudge the task force. My short answer is over the long term, absolutely not. I believe that this is a long-term job creator, but will it be disruptive? And will some people have their jobs at jeopardy because of the new technologies? On that, I can't offer any sort of guarantee or comfort.
Senator Britt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair, thank you so much for being here with us today. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation, and obviously so early in your tenure in this new role. In this year's monetary policy report, one of the most encouraging themes is the increased in business investment that we're seeing across the country. In Alabama and many places, we're seeing companies expand, manufacturers grow, and communities are benefiting from that investment. I believe that these are good signs and that they're also important for the future because they help us determine whether America remains the most competitive economy in the world. My question for you is, as you look at the economy, what data tells you that today's investments are laying the groundwork and the foundation for a stronger long-term growth and greater American competitiveness?
So it's a great question, and thanks for highlighting the capital investment boom. This is what most countries are searching for. This is the seed corn for the next group of job creation and productivity. To be honest, over the last dozen or so years, we have been waiting for the surge in business investment. I know in some academic accounting sense, this is leading to a surge in prices in the next 12 months. I don't want to sound dismissive of it. The surge in prices is real. But I'd sure rather the most successful companies in the world investing in property, plant, and equipment than doing a share buyback. So I'm encouraged by it. The trend is our friend here, and this business capital investment is contributing massively to the GDP we've seen in the last 12 months. My colleagues know I'm not big for forward guidance, but I would guess that that trend continues. What gives me optimism about it? Well, when the private sector deploys this amount of capital, they must see something shiny at the other end of that rainbow. They must see a very good return on investment. That's why they're taking this capital and they're putting it to work. I tend to think that private investment has a multiplier way higher than one. I'll let you and others judge whether that's true of government spending too.
I'm going to go ahead and switch gears because I know we're on a tight time frame today, which I appreciate. And I'm going to follow up on a question that the chairman asked. I'd like to get you to kind of dig into this. Some banks are already approaching and crossing into new tailoring categories, and they're making staffing and compliance and long-term business decisions based on thresholds that haven't been updated since 2019. At the same time, the Federal Reserve continues to rely on those categories and other regulatory frameworks. So my question is, how are you thinking about updating these tailoring frameworks when it comes to what banks can expect to see and proposals in the future?
So it's a great question, one I take seriously. To be candid with you and the chairman and the other members of the committee, monetary policy has distracted me a bit in the first 7 weeks, but the Federal Reserve Chairman is supposed to be the chairman of monetary policy and payments and consumer affairs and supervision and regulation. But I can tell you this, Vice Chairman Bowman has been working on these initiatives. She has briefed me about them. And broadly, I'll step back and say modernizing our banking system, streamlining regulations so that the rules that apply to the systemically important financial institutions are not one size fits all for every other. The secret to the American economy is we have a few thousand banks and other providers of credit who know their smaller markets bigger. I'd rather have that system than what most of our G20 peers have, where they have a half a dozen institutions implicitly backed by their government. I think reform is coming to supervision and regulation. I have my own ideas that might be as dramatic as I've already shared on monetary policy here. And I think the sooner we can get to the bottom of it, the better. If I could say one more thing, the reforms we've been putting in place over the last 15 years coming out of Dodd-Frank, as we learned in the Silicon Valley Bank example and the First Republic example, they didn't work perfectly. My predecessors had very little choice but then to do another overall bailout. We don't want that to happen again. So we want to tailor the rules and the capital so they serve the best interests of the U.S. economy, which I describe as a system that is safe, sound, and competitive.
And I just hope, given what you've said, we double down on reviewing the framework. We know how important tailoring is, and also just the need for regulatory certainty. So thank you for that. In my last remaining seconds, I just want to say thank you for your commitment in the first 7 weeks, almost 2 months. You said it earlier, but to performance, to accountability, to responsibility, and to integrity. Appreciate what you're doing and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Warsh, it's good to see you again. 7 weeks in, you got a hell of a job. Inflation's still too high. How you predict the president's chaotic foreign policy, wars in the Middle East. I'm going to come to an AI question, but let me be clear. As I said to you yesterday, I didn't vote for you. But we're going to find a lot of common ground to work together. I am going to hold you, and I've been appreciative of your comments about inflation, about the Fed's independence, but I think there are many, many common areas we can work together on and look forward to that. I want to hit, and one of the things that most impressed me in our first meeting was your recognition that probably the biggest issue you're going to face is AI. My 2 cents is I think it is going to have long-term, I agree with you, it's going to be job creation. Very short-term, I think you may see some upsurge in terms of energy production and data center build out. Years 2 through 5, 2 through 6, I think there could be massive economic disruption, particularly towards new college grads. It's a policymaker's job, but if this is going to have the potential effect, I hope I'm wrong, but I'd take a bet with you that 3 years out, we could see 30% recent college grad unemployment. If we see that, what do you see as the Fed's role is in terms of urging your actions, but also helping us sort that out?
Senator, first of all, I appreciate it. I promised to this.
Don't say nice things about me. He's got me on a clock. Answer my question.
All right, good. Well, let me just say.
I do indeed.
Let me just say this. I appreciate that you haven't given up on me. I haven't given up on you. I haven't given up on your colleagues. I'm the independent head of a central bank. No matter how people voted, I'm going to be serving all of you.
This doesn't count against my time.
AI, let me get to the core of your question. I am more confident that there will be a surge in output because the U.S. is at the cutting edge of AI than any certainty about the effect on the labor market in the next few years. The United States will be a winner. That is my informed judgment. But this is a time filled with both challenges and risks. We take both parts of our dual mandate seriously. Do I believe that the productivity improvements over time will be structurally disinflationary? I do. I believe everything technology touches ultimately gets cheaper. Your background, I think, would be consistent with that. What are going to be the effect on the labor markets in years 2 through 5? It's a fair question. The way I would frame it to you on college graduates, if you're a new college graduate, AI is probably native to you. You've been playing with AI effectively since your high school years. I feel as though you likely have the skills and the intuitions, the same way that people of my generation or younger were native to the internet. If you've already been in the workforce for a while and you're a little resistant to change, that's where the encouragement needs to be to think about how these skills can make you more productive. These are fair questions. I don't have easy answers, but I do have a task force that's going to be thinking about it.
We have to work together on it, because if we hit this bump, and I think it's going to come, we got to collaborate. Now, Senator Reid asked a very good question about Mythos, and I 100% agree. Mythos is already yesterday's news.
Right.
Because these models are coming out so quickly and they pose such security risks. I think it's incumbent, because of the risk it provides to our financial system, that at some point you're going to be, and I'm asking you now, I think, personally, I believe we need some level of mandatory testing pre-release because of the potentially draconian and dramatic effects. Now, how long, who's on that panel is critical, but what do you think about pre-testing release regime going forward, more than just the voluntary willingness of a company to come forward?
Yeah, so two things. First, these models are in their capabilities are growing at an exponential rate. In technology, we would say hyper Moore's law. It wasn't long ago people sitting in my position thought that the US was a time of secular stagnation. All the good stuff had been invented. Boy, that seems awfully anachronistic. We're moving fast. So what can we do? I don't have, as it currently structured, decision rights as to who has access, but I do have a bully pulpit, as you mentioned, and I'm unafraid to share my views with the Treasury Secretary and others. The cutting edge is moving very quickly. Key institutions are vulnerable. The sooner they can mitigate their vulnerabilities, the better. I'm looking forward to working with you.
I hope that you will be willing to advocate moving on beyond a voluntary regime, because the downside risk. 12 seconds, quickly address the role of all of the Federal Reserve banks and your vision of what the role they should play.
So very quickly, I'll just say this. We should be good stewards of taxpayer money. We should be consolidating functions where we can. But my mental model, Senator, as I mentioned to you yesterday, is we should have 12 centers of excellence. I've got more than 12 problems on my plate. And if each reserve bank were to develop an expertise on something that matters to our remit and the American economy, I'd encourage them to develop that advantage.
Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Warsh, great to see you. Thank you for being here, and congratulations on your first semi-annual report. It's good to see you here again. We got some good news this week. Inflation was down, and that's progress under this administration and under your new leadership at the Fed. During the Biden administration, we saw reckless spending that drove prices up and left Nebraska families to foot the bill. In 2019, the federal deficit was roughly $900 billion, and by 2024, that was $1.9 trillion. And we saw inflation go up 20%, really stressing Nebraska families at the grocery store. Cleaning out this mess is going to take discipline, and it's going to take reform. Chairman Warsh, we discussed in our meeting also how to implement some reforms, such as process improvement. We talked specifically about Lean Six Sigma and the opportunity there. You promised to have a reform-oriented Federal Reserve, and we're willing to break up or make a break from some of the mistakes of the past. I commend you for that and want to work with you to see it through. One of the most important places to start is with the Fed's balance sheet, an issue I've consistently raised with other Fed governors. The Fed expanded its balance sheet dramatically during the pandemic, peaking at nearly $9 trillion. Since 2022, the Fed has shrunk it down to about $6.5 trillion in December 2025. And I'm glad to see that the Fed was making progress over the last few years, but the balance sheet is still not down to pre-COVID levels. Actually, the balance sheet is rising again and now stands at around $6.7 trillion today. Chairman Warsh, do you see the balance sheet increasing again as a trend in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Senator, thank you for the question. I've been focused on the Fed's balance sheet, frankly, since my last day at the Fed some 15 years ago into the present. I don't want to prejudge the conclusions of this balance sheet task force, whereas the chairman said I put together a team of rivals to fiddle with it, to evaluate it, to come up with their own judgments. But I'll give you my predilections. Monetary policy is made currently through at least two material instruments, interest rates and the balance sheet. In fact, we grew the balance sheet, created quantitative easing when I served the last time in the darkest days of the crisis because we'd already cut rates to zero. So expanding the balance sheet had the intent of helping markets clear, but it was also another tool of monetary policy. I still believe that is true.
Wasn't that supposed to be temporary?
Indeed, that was our entry principle, was that we would get out of that business. The central bank has not, for a whole range of reasons, gotten out of that business. My general view is, as we think about inflation risks and we think about the conduct of monetary policy writ large, we have two instruments that we should be thinking about. The balance sheet is one of them. I'll make only one other point. Monetary policy needs to be architected, needs to be designed by the policymakers around the FOMC. The plumbing, the operations, how we do that is conducted by the New York Fed. I want the architecture to drive the plumbing, not the plumbing to drive the architecture. We're going to make a monetary policy decision with respect to the balance sheet. I'm very open-minded to changes, and any changes we make will be well discussed, well shared, and I think quite deliberate. And the financial markets, who have seen the balance sheet grow effectively for a generation, they'll have plenty of time to adjust if we make changes.
I know you said you just wanted to make that one comment, but I'm going to push you to ask for a little more. What do you believe is the smallest balance sheet that the Fed could operate with?
My predilection, my inclination is interest rate policy should be the driver of monetary policy. The balance sheet should be as small as practicable to conduct operations. And the balance sheet can expand when there's a crisis. The balance sheet can also expand if an institution needs liquidity. That's part of the reason why we've created a discount window. But a permanently large balance sheet with a duration of assets that are larger than the duration of assets of treasuries, for example, that are held in the broader public markets, boy, that sure seems a little bit more like fiscal policy that I'm comfortable with. So I would like us to have a leaner, meaner balance sheet, but it's a discussion for my colleagues, and I've got three real pros that are going to help us think it through.
All right, well, I have run out of time, and I'm sure the chair will be happy that I'm going to maybe get done before it reaches zero.
Thank you.
But I do have a question I'll follow up with, for the record, on scams, because this is something that the banking industry is telling me they're increasingly seeing, and it's costing people who have deposits a lot of money. So I'll follow up with that.
Senator, we're opposed to scams, but I'm happy to follow up.
Tough stand.
Good to hear. Good to hear. This is great. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, we agree on that point. Let me turn to the headline inflation numbers that came out yesterday at 3.5%, above the Fed's 2% target. Prices are too high for families, and we need to get them down. I think we can agree on that. At your press conference a few weeks ago, you said that higher inflation, in part, and I quote, reflects supply shocks that have driven price increases in certain sectors, including energy, unquote. In other words, a reason that we're seeing prices go up is that the supply of products and services has dropped in some areas of the economy, right?
Yes.
And I do think it's important that the public understand the causes of some of these supply shocks. You would agree, would you not, Mr. Chairman, that the war in Iran has caused a supply shock in the energy markets?
Yeah, the military conflicts have caused the price of oil to be higher than it otherwise would.
Absolutely right. And Americans are paying the burden of that as we go. We've also seen supply shocks in other areas. Last year, your colleague, Austin Goolsbee, president of the Chicago Fed, said that, and I quote, "a tariff is like a negative supply shock," unquote. And we've seen plenty of tariffs. Obviously, we have the Supreme Court decision that may bring those down over time, the impact of it. But the negative supply shocks have been real and can be traced to the Trump administration agenda. So when you say that supply shocks are part of the reason prices are going up, you would acknowledge that they're the result of decisions that have been made by the president, like going to war with Iran, right?
So what I'd say is particular price shocks happen to particular prices that we don't have control over, but I don't want to suggest we don't have control over inflation in the medium term. That's our job. But screwworm affects beef prices. Other things affect oil prices and milk prices, and I understand that has an effect on people's household budgets.
Indeed, it does, and I think we've seen the price of energy go up by billions and billions of dollars, and the American people are essentially paying for that at the pump and other places in their pocketbooks. As you know, your predecessor as chairman was regularly harassed and berated by the President of the United States on social media with respect to interest rates. At least so far, you seem to have escaped that fate. But I do think it's important that we have an understanding of whether or not the president is trying to influence Fed conduct. I know you were asked recently at your last press conference about any communications with the president. I think your response was, on the president, I don't have anything for you. Mr. Chairman, was that a yes or a no with respect to whether you've had communications with President Trump?
So I like what I said the first time. Senator, I don't have anything for you. I will say this, though. I do meet with the Treasury Secretary weekly. I talk to him often between that.
Mr.
And
Chairman, I just want to make sure
I'll make my own decisions as monetary policy.
I just want to understand the answer. Have you or have you not had communications with President Trump since you took this position?
I just don't want to be in the business of sharing discussions that the president and I have.
Okay.
I will tell you what I've said to the president repeatedly and said to the Treasury Secretary. They chose an independent guy to do an independent job, and that's exactly what I plan on doing.
Okay.
And I'd like to think over the last 7 weeks, given the decisions we've made and the things we've done, that it's not just words, it's actions now to start to demonstrate that.
So, Mr. Chairman, I mean, I think it's important. I take from your answer you've had communications. You don't want to disclose the content. Will you commit to do what your predecessor did, which was to release your appointment schedule and conversations with President Trump?
I don't know what the past practice was. I will be in full compliance with the law. As I understand it, there's an ongoing FOIA request on my calendar, and I will share it consistent with the law.
Well,
I believe the first one's already come out.
I think this was this wasn't in response to any legal requirement forced by FOIA. It was a question of transparency, and I do think, given the president's past record of trying to influence Fed behavior via social media with respect to your predecessor, if he's trying to influence Fed behavior through private conversations with you, I think that needs to be something the public is aware of. And I'm asking you whether you will commit to disclosing when you have conversations with the President of the United States.
Senator, I can offer you this assurance. The president has not, before I took this office, before I raised my right hand, he has not tried to influence the conduct of monetary policy. And if he tried to, I would continue to keep my head down and do the job. I don't have a long record, but I've got a 7-week record, and before that I had a 25-year record, and I think that should count for something.
I appreciate that. I hope you'll just follow the precedent your predecessor.
Senator
Thank you.
Kennedy, the floor is yours.
Well, Senator Van Hollen's my buddy, so this is not meant toward him, but I always get a kick out of my Democratic friends talking about transparency. Toward the end, God bless him, you could bake a Thanksgiving turkey in the time that it took President Biden to walk across the stage, and they kept it quiet till they couldn't. I'm sorry he was in that condition, but this transparency stuff cuts both ways. What's wrong with you talking to the President of the United States?
So, Senator, I've got a wide lens. I'm interested in hearing points of view from a whole range of people. We have a narrow remit. I'm interested in what's happening in the world, in the Middle East,
But I mean,
and
is
elsewhere.
there anything wrong with it? Do you have to, when you do it, do you have to go out and look for the last phone booth in Washington and put a bag over your head and sneak in there and call him? Or return his call? Is anything wrong with that?
I certainly don't feel uncomfortable receiving a call from the chairman of this committee or the President of the United States.
Okay. Do you think Ben Bernanke ever talked to the president?
When I was a governor, I recall several conversations and
How about
frequent
Alan
meetings.
Greenspan?
When I was a young staffer in the White House, I remember being honored by him coming into the White House and meeting with the president and the president's advisors quite frequently.
Okay. I think what I would give me concern, and I think it's the basis for my colleagues' concern, is that you just do whatever the president says, but you're not going to do that, are you, or are you?
Senator, I'm going to call it the best I see it. The president never asked me to do anything inappropriate, and if he did, I wouldn't do it. I'm going
Okay.
to follow the law and do my best to follow the remit you gave us.
Okay, so in the last year or so, recent past, I'll say, the Fed cut rates 3 times because they were worried about the labor market. Is that a fair assessment?
That's my sense of what
And
they did
it
before my
worked.
arrival.
It worked, correct?
Well, that's a longer discussion. They did
Well, is
cut
the
rates.
labor market in a mess today?
The labor market's in good shape, but I
Yeah,
wouldn't want to
okay,
draw
so
that causal connection.
So I don't have much time, Mr. Chairman. I love you like a taco, but I'm gonna, yeah, you don't filibuster on me. So it worked, okay? Now we have inflation, okay? What caused it? In 20 seconds.
In 20 seconds, inflation is caused when a one-time change in price is broadened out.
I know what inflation is,
And the
Mr.
Federal
Chairman.
and the
Tell me
Federal
what
Reserve,
caused it.
monetary policy, sir.
Okay, well, I would say what is causing it is AI, the conflict with Iran, and probably the residual effect of the fact that some imports have become more expensive. Okay? And I think any fair-minded person would conclude that. There was a lot of economists said, oh, you know, the impact of inflation on the rise in the cost of imports would be a one-shot deal. You know, you can teach that one round or flat. I don't know. I think it's probably had a residual effect. Okay, is it temporary? Is it permanent? The inflation.
It's not going to be permanent under my watch, Senator.
Okay, what are you going to do about it?
So we're going to do 3 things. One is for those people in markets that think the Fed really was comfortable with a higher level of inflation, we're doing our best to disabuse them.
Okay, you're going to talk about it. What's the second thing you're going to do?
We're going to take ownership of it. We're going to say we have the power to do something.
Okay,
about
you're
it.
going to own it.
That's
What's the third thing you're going to do?
We're going to look at our tools in the changing economy, both balance sheet and interest rate, and see whether we need to adjust policy to take it head on.
You're going to look at your tools. That's the third thing. I'm not asking you what action the Fed's going to take. That would be improper, Mr. Chairman. I wouldn't do that, and you wouldn't tell me anyway. Give specifically, like you're talking to a 10th grader, okay? Not. What are your options? Leave it alone, right? Leave rates alone. This is one option.
That is an option, Senator.
Raise rates.
Another option.
Cut rates.
A third option, a non-exclusive list of options, but yes.
Well, and a lot of it depends on whether it's temporary or permanent. So how do you decide whether it's temporary or permanent? I got that in with 6 seconds left.
Well done.
You use 5 task forces to get to the big and hard questions instead of trying to paper it over with policies that have not been proven as successful.
Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Warsh, good to see you again. Thank
to
you for
see you,
meeting
Senator.
with me.
Thank you.
You've talked about the task forces. What's the timeline for getting reports from the task forces?
So I'm not a very patient person. People have said that to do all this good work, you'll need years. I gave them 6 months.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that will be made public?
Yeah, the details, even much of the deliberations, I want to do that in the public square because we all own these decisions at the end of the day. Ultimately, decisions will be made by my FOMC colleagues. I think they'll start to get briefings on some of the early reports from the task force, early indications, hopefully as early as September. with my expectation and hope by year end, we're going to hear their conclusions and decide what to do with it.
Thank you. And then just for clarification, in January of 2025, do you recall the inflation rate? It was about 3%, correct?
I'm going to have to take your word for the precise number, but I knew inflation was still well above target.
Yeah, it was about 3%, and that's when Joe Biden left office. And the current inflation rate right now is about 3.5%, is that correct?
There are various measures. I'm confident in telling you it's been above target for 63 months. It's
Is it
not where we
above
want it to be.
3%?
By some measures, by other measures, it's not. But I don't want to suggest I'm happy with any of those measures. I'm not.
Okay, I appreciate it. Let me talk a little bit about an area that is important for me, and I think many states that deal with a hospitality tourism industry. Unfortunately, under this administration, we've seen significant declines in the number of international visitors to the U.S. The current situation has actually led to our travel trade deficit in this country going from a $51 billion surplus in 2019 to a $72 billion deficit today. How does the Federal Reserve governors consider the specific impact of higher unemployment, lower wages, and reduced economic activities in communities with large tourism economies like Las Vegas?
So we are consumers of this information. We are keenly interested in the good side of the economy and the services side of the economy. My view, which is not universally shared in the economics profession, is that there's no limit to what this economy can grow. Productivity-led growth can move higher, and that doesn't tell me it's inflationary. But we care about the services part of the economy, and we're trying to take that into account when we try to make decisions about the dual mandate.
Well, I appreciate that because you're right. Your dual mandate is maintain stable prices and full employment. Let me tell you what's happening in the hospitality industry because of the policies of this administration. When you talk about full employment, it is not happening. What I'm hearing from people in my state is that it's not necessarily full employment with good wages and livable wages. They're patching together multiple low-wage jobs because they are taking down from full employment to part-time employment. Do you consider that in your analysis, going from full-time employment to part-time and many individuals having several part-time jobs? How do you calculate that into your analysis?
So we think hard about it. You heard in my opening statement the clear judgment of my colleagues and me, which is the labor market broadly looks in balance, but I don't want to make that sound like it's easy for hardworking Americans in your state and other places. There's a lot of dynamism happening in the economy. There's a lot of structural change. And during periods of transition, it's often true that the labor markets in aggregate look better than people feel in different parts. And during disruption, they try to recreate a job they had before through the gig economy and other means. We take it into account. Overall, I would say the labor market part of our mandate looks pretty good. The price stability part of our mandate looks less good.
All right, and I am concerned because not just Las Vegas, but many tourism-based industries and hospitality, what we're seeing is lower full employment. And I would hope, and this is a conversation I've had with previous chairs as well, I would hope that you're considering that. It is a large sector of employment across the country. And I know you made a statement that rise in prices is not necessarily inflationary, correct? At what point do you consider it to be inflationary? Is there a timeline associated with that?
So when an increase in prices in a particular category like oil or like milk or eggs, when we see that broaden out and affect the generalized price level, that's something we can do something about. That's the way I think of inflation. When prices go up, I know it hits your constituents every day. I'm not trying to sound dismissive of it, but I also don't want to say that there's much that we can do about cattle prices or milk prices today. But there's a lot we can do to make sure that the entire grocery aisle doesn't have higher prices, and that's what we're committed to do.
Thank you.
Senator Haggerty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Warsh, on July 18th, almost a year ago today, President Trump signed my legislation, the Genius Act, into law. A thorough rulemaking process is absolutely vital to ensure that U.S. dollar dominance exists here in the digital age. And I look forward to seeing the Federal Reserve's ongoing work in this matter. I just want to make that point clear. It's important, it needs to be done, and very much appreciate the Fed's attention to it. I want to turn now, though, to a broader concern, and that has to do with the independence of monetary policy. You've had a number of conversations with my colleagues about this. I want to emphasize something that I think is quite important. The special insulation that the Fed receives with regard to monetary policy, I think as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't extend to every other function of what the Fed does. I think it should be limited to monetary policy. For example, you think about bank regulations and supervision. That's entirely distinct from monetary policy. Regulation requires normative policy judgments about capital, about credit availability, about risk, economic growth, the structure of the banking system. All of these considerations need to roll into it. And you think about what's happened in recent years, regulation has even strayed far afield. You think about what's happened with respect to climate policy, or Michael Barr's failed Basel III proposal. These decisions are not the same as setting interest rates or managing the Fed's balance sheet. And quite simply, I think they're forms of executive regulatory power. The Supreme Court has clarified, for example, that the FDIC is subject to ordinary principles of executive accountability. Comparable regulatory functions at the Fed shouldn't be held to a different standard, in my view, simply because they sit within the central bank. So my question is this, Mr. Chairman, do you agree that the Federal Reserve's independence should be narrowly tied to its monetary mandate?
Senator, thank you for the question. Like you said, independence is at its peak in the conduct of monetary policy. I believe that when I showed up at the Fed in 2006. I believed at my confirmation hearing 7 or 8 weeks ago. I believe it now. In the conduct of bank and regulatory policy on things like the Genius Act, my general view is we should be working with our bank regulators, the other bank regulators, the OCC and the FDIC, see if we can't put out our rules together. What I don't think we want is any kind of regulatory arbitrage where firms are trying to game who's got the lightest regulation and race there. I don't think there's anything wrong with us working together with other bank regulators to try to figure out what's the best policy. I've got some extraordinary colleagues at the Fed. They've been able to think hard about these issues. I think those discussions should happen and do happen.
I don't disagree at all with that, and I like your approach in terms of coordination, but there's something deeper that I'm concerned about, Mr. Chairman, and that is, and just make an example, let's suppose a future Congress decides to embed some sort of regulatory function inside the Fed, seeking to insulate it from our supervision, from our oversight. In some way, that could become a backdoor that I don't think any of us want to see. And what I'm trying to make clear is that beyond monetary policy, I'll ask you the question, do you think that this special insulation applies to other regulatory and supervisory types of functions?
So I spent 8 weeks as a summer associate at a law firm, so I'm probably not best positioned to opine on the Supreme Court. Senator Warren could do a better job than I. I do recall in the most recent opinion a footnote from the majority that says we are not suggesting that if other things went to the Federal Reserve, it would get any insulation. Beyond that, I'm on shaky ground in trying to opine on what the Supreme Court opinion means prospectively.
Yeah, I wasn't looking for your legal opinion, but I do just think as a matter of common sense, I wanted to get that on the record, that there is a real distinction here, and I appreciate that. I want to turn to another important matter, and that's the monetary policy report that you work with. The most recent monetary policy report added a new aggregate to the measurements, the M2 aggregate. And I just wanted to ask you to explain why this metric is useful and why it's been added.
Thank you, Senator. That was an Easter egg that we hid in there to see if anyone read these monetary policy reports. So I'm encouraged that you did. There is almost a page talking about M2 and monetary aggregates. That was done with a purpose. I do not show up here as a monetarist. I do not show up and say the secret to inflation is if we only knew M2, everything would be swell. But monetary aggregates had been taken out of the monetary policy report probably about a decade ago, maybe a bit longer. My view is that a modern central banker should have a mosaic of information and should not be allergic to any data that happens to be inconsistent with dogma that he or she might have been taught in Econ 1. I have this old-fashioned view that monetary policy has something to do with money. Mm-hmm. I remember an old professor of mine that said, who was a proper Keynesian economist, he said, well, I don't understand how to think about inflation in a place like Zimbabwe without talking about money. So I think money matters. What we witnessed when we looked at some of the monetary aggregates is they are not perfect. We don't measure money very well. We don't measure the velocity of money very well. But it's a pretty good cross-check. And had we seen the surge and paid attention to the surge in inflation and
Chairman.
money in 21, 22, we might have seen this problem sooner. I apologize, Mr.
Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. Chair Warsh, welcome to the committee. So you may know that Minnesota Senator Hubert Humphrey, who's once held the seat that I now occupy from Minnesota, led the charge in Congress to include maximum employment as part of the Fed's dual mandate. And we can probably agree that keeping these two goals of maximum employment and stable prices within the confines of the monetary policy power that the Fed wields, that just makes sense. Because it's a strategy that delivers stable prices, a strategy that delivers stable prices while working people can't find jobs or can't afford their lives. I mean, that's not a healthy economy. I expect you to agree with that.
And I do. Thank you.
So I was very interested in the task forces that you established last month to advise you on reform and modernization. And I want to just ask you about one of them in particular. You've created a task force looking at productivity and jobs. And that's really good, it seems to me. This task force should be able to get at the power of the Fed's dual mandate and ask also some of the big questions that everyone is asking about the power, the impact of AI on wages and people's income and employment. So let me just ask about this particular task force on productivity and jobs. So as I understand it, it is led by three people, venture capitalist and investor Mark Andreessen, who's made billions from AI and is a major Trump donor, another tech executive who recently laid off thousands of people, and then an academic economist from my alma mater, Stanford University, who is currently on leave to do research at Anthropic. So I want to ask about this. Is there anyone on the task force who has experience in the labor market, or somebody who can bring the perspective of an employer rather than an investor to the questions that are going to be asked and hopefully answered by this task force?
So if I could say two things. One is those three people you referenced are three of the smartest people that I know. And I've been...
I'm not disputing that. I'm wondering how you intend to bring into this work the perspective of people who are working people, bring in the perspective of labor and not just investors.
I think it's a fair question. I've got 18 colleagues who are going to join me and consume the deliberations they have in the report. And we're the ones that have the dual mandate. And as I said to your colleague, there is no disfavored part of our mandate, and we're awfully focused on full employment. So that's my commitment to you. We haven't outsourced this decision to three people. What we've outsourced to is a bunch of thinking about this massive technology shock. And I'll only note one other thing. Chad Jones, that professor that you mentioned, his academic work, he's an academic, I'll admit that. But
I'm not opposed to that. I'm just trying to figure out...
But his academic work has been very, very focused on what is the effect of the labor markets of these technology shocks, both the good and the bad. And I think that history he can bring to bear to the work of the task force.
So can you understand why a task force that is led by people in large part who are likely to get richer by AI might not be the most credible people to folks on the ground who are doing the work, who are worried about what impact this AI is going to have on their jobs? And there's the concern, of course, is that the productivity that is expected to be delivered by AI, if that actually happens, that the benefits of that productivity are going to accrue to capital and not to labor. And that, it seems to me, the credibility of this task force rests on hearing the perspective of working folks in their deliberations.
I would expect before they come to their conclusions, they are going to hear from folks that will be affected. They are going to hear from employers that are getting struck with this technology shock and have disruption in their labor force. But I don't want to suggest to you that in any of these task forces that we have the 19 people of all different backgrounds. But what I want to tell you is if you think they have a credibility deficit, I don't. I think they're incredibly talented. And we will make sure to take both parts of our dual mandate in consideration of their output.
I think the issue, sir, is that when there are the big guys sitting at the table, is there anybody sitting at the table who's bringing the perspective of working people to those really important questions? There are labor leaders, there are labor economists, they are folks whose expertise is in issues around wage stagnation and how that impacts working people. And I would ask you to consider bringing that perspective, not to be heard on the side, but to be actually at the table with the big guys. I think that is a credibility issue that you could address very easily. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Tillis.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I think you're doing a great job today. I appreciate your composure. Mr. Warsh, a quick question on just immigration. You know, some people are proudly discussing how we had almost net zero immigration in the last quarter, but we're starting to look a little bit like China, Japan, European countries in terms of our replacement rate, in terms of natural replacement rate. So if net immigration were to remain near zero for an extended period, how would that change your estimates on GDP, the neutral interest rate, and the amount of non-inflationary job growth the economy can sustain? And in some ways, it touches on, I think, Senator Cortez Masto's question, too, about jobs unfilled, but just curious.
Thank you, Senator. You sure didn't toss up a softball there. The way I think about it is immigration policy is set by you and the administration, but we are...
Yeah, I mean, I don't want you to talk about policy. What I'm trying to do is communicate to the American people, we can make the mistake of Western Europe, Japan, and other industrialized nations, or we can fix this population growth problem. If we don't, these are policies, then how does that make your job more difficult if we were to sustain the current trajectory?
The way those decisions affect us is it affects potential GDP. The biggest, hardest decision we make is what can this economy produce? How fast can we grow? Potential GDP is a function of two things. How many hours are we working? People in this country working.
So just in a word, because I want to ask a few other questions.
And then second, productivity.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
if the worker hours are constant, we need a productivity boom.
Just a real quick question. Would you be thrilled to know that we could guarantee zero net growth for the next decade because that would make your job easier?
We're going to take the number of hours the American people and your policies produce, and we're going to do with it the best we can.
We got a problem. You can't fix it. But what I'm saying is if we're trying to make your job easier, having this on the agenda is not going to make your job easier. And I understand the position you have to take, but I want to point to something that people are high-fiving and talking about net zero immigration growth as if it's a good thing. It's only a good thing if you want to repeat the mistakes of Western Europe, Japan, China, and other nations that didn't get their replacement rate right. You know, bringing in great people that may have been born in Colombia and aspired to become a senator, for example, those sorts of things. I mean, he didn't get it right every time, but no. Mr. Warsh, I told you also, and just for the American people, do you have a magic wand where you can just walk in and convince 7 people of the FOMC to vote exactly the way you want them to?
Perhaps I wish I do, but I do not have such a wand.
So you are one of a body where you have to gain consensus to make an interest rate move, right? Monetary policy move, right?
Yes, and it's a consensus-led organization.
And based on some of the comments from even Governor Waller, who we'd consider to be pretty hawkish just this week, he's not guaranteeing that we're going to be able to lower interest rates anytime soon based on data-driven decisions. Did that just occur this week? In a speech, I think, up in New York?
There are a diversity of views. I wouldn't want to dwell on any one of them in particular.
No, it's okay. But what I'm trying to explain to people who think the president can give you a call, you make a decision, it happens, that never happens. Wouldn't have happened under Powell, wouldn't happen under you, wouldn't happen under anybody who's responsible chairman. I just wanted to make that point. The last thing, if you could just tell me, I know you don't want to get in. I think Senator Britt asked you some questions. I love the fact that you're doing reform. I would like to see the project charter for the task forces, if you have that. If people are managing this, milestones, any sort of dashboard you have, the things that any well-put-together set of task forces would have assembled for a 6-month project, I'd like to just track it. Not necessarily for the record, but if you could commit to have a meeting with the people running it with me, I'd like to see that just to watch the mechanics play out over the next 6 months. And then lastly, if you can, I believe Silicon Valley Bank is a classic example of why the Fed needs to have its independence on monetary policy, but on bank examination and supervision, I believe a U.S. Senator should minimally be able to go into a SCIF and understand why banks like Silicon Valley Bank had multiple matters requiring attention and then matters requiring immediate attention well before they failed. And nobody knew except some examiner and likely people in San Francisco, in the San Francisco Fed. That stuff has got to change. I don't see any rational basis for that independence, and we've got some legislation I'd like to talk with you about. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Mr. Warnock.
Well, thank you so very much,
Lucky
Madam
you.
Chair. The American economy is heavily leveraged on the success of artificial intelligence. And this is an issue that I'm very interested in, been engaging and talking to folks in the industry and folks outside of the industry, various stakeholders. According to a Bloomberg analysis, AI spending most recently climbed to about 8% of the U.S. gross domestic product, driving the country's economic growth. Chair Walsh, you have long been bullish on AI. However, up to now, despite investors betting big on them, none of the major AI models have been meaningfully profitable. What are the consequences to our economy if none of these companies ever become profitable?
So if they were to disappoint investors, I think the capital markets would dry up for them, and some of that capital investment would be curtailed.
I guess that's one way of putting it. I guess I'm getting at where ordinary folks are in the midst of that. The markets, behind the markets are real people who have retirement savings and who are trying to make their present as well as their future work. American retirement accounts are increasingly tied to AI. And so there's the human issue, driven by massive increases in the stock prices of chip and AI companies. You might talk about the current markets in a way it's tall and narrow. Let's imagine if we are in an AI bubble. What would happen to our economy and more specifically Americans' retirement savings if that bubble popped?
So I think it's a fair question, Senator. I take it seriously. I'm not in the business of providing a Wall Street newsletter, but I'll say broadly to your question about the effects on the economy. Booms and busts do not help the real economy, and they don't make the central bank's job easier. What the central bank is trying to achieve is price stability, full employment, all in the context of financial stability. On the question of these AI companies, certainly the surge in their investment and the surge in their valuations is notable, but I'll also note one other thing, Senator. Over the course of the last couple of months, we've seen the market cap, both of the public companies and of private companies, under some pressure. At the overall indices, we do seem to see a broadening out. Now, why is that? Because earnings now for the last several quarters more broadly are moving up. I don't want to suggest that that should give us any complacency, but what the Fed's looking for is economic strength to broaden and the inflation that we talked about earlier to become more narrow.
So I'd be worried about a massive economic slowdown. You know, the impact of Wall Street on Main Street, and I'd be worried about job losses. Stock prices tumbling would mean Americans could not retire as planned. And I don't want to see taxpayers holding the bag should this AI bubble pop. I'm not against AI. AI is not going anywhere. Right. It has both promise and peril. I just want us to be thinking critically about this from all angles. Earlier this month, you announced a new task force to assess the effect of AI on productivity and jobs. The three individuals you chose for the task force are tech executives who have directly worked for or with AI labs, all three of them. Yes or no, will the Fed include anyone on this task force with an alternative viewpoint on AI? For example, anyone who represents the workers whose lives may be upended by increased adoption of AI tools and technology?
So, Senator, it's a fair question. As I mentioned to your colleague a few moments ago, what I'd say is one of the people on those task forces is an academic. Now, I don't want to suggest that the academic is representing some
You don't want to
group.
suggest that the academic is being academic.
I don't want to suggest that, but this isn't a faculty lounge discussion. What I do want to suggest is that academics' work has spent a lot of time talking about prior technology shocks and the displacement that it has on labor. The assurance I can give you is that these three people on that task force, like the other task forces, they're not the deciders. You're talking to one of the deciders.
Right.
The 19 of us around the FOMC with a breadth of backgrounds and interest, we're going to decide what we think of their conclusions.
Yeah, well, as a decision maker, I always want various viewpoints. I certainly have nothing against an academic expertise. I think that's important, and it's too often ignored in some of the appointments that we've seen around here lately. But here's my problem: Americans are worried about what AI will
Senator,
mean
your
for the
time is
economy.
up.
I'm wrapping up, sir, and I'm worried that this viewpoint isn't represented at the Fed, and I would look to broaden.
Senator Lummis, your
perspective.
time is yours.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple questions about bank supervision before we go to monetary policy. The first one is Vice Chair Bowman has ordered an independent review of the supervision of Silicon Bank and Signature Banks, and I think that's a really good thing. I applaud her and support her efforts there. So have you instructed your staff, including the attorneys in the legal division, to cooperate with this independent review?
Yeah, so thank you, Senator Lummis. This call for a review of what happened around Silicon Valley Bank preceded my time at the Fed.
Yes, it did.
But I'm certainly aware of the ongoing investigation, and my general rule is that we should be cooperative to investigations, and we should try to get to the bottom of the facts of on regulatory and supervisory issues.
There are rumors that there may have been destruction of records by some of the staff at the Division of Bank Supervision, and of course that's a crime. So if records relating to the supervision of these banks were intentionally deleted by staff before you were at the Fed, before you ever became chairman, will you order your staff to assist in recovery of these records and cooperate with law enforcement?
Yeah, so I made a bold statement to one of your colleagues before that I was opposed to scams. I can make a bold statement I'm opposed to criminal activity. I have no reason to believe there's any criminal activity here. But I think we want to get to the bottom of an investigation. If there's an ongoing investigation and investigators generally want access to things, there's no reason why they shouldn't have access.
Thank you. I want to turn to a proposed rule that is being considered and ask for your thoughts on the proposed rule. And it has to do with the Federal Reserve Board's payment accounts. Skinny master accounts is kind of a term that's used. My staff has told me that if a doctor submits statements to an insurance company, they have two choices. They can pay 5% in bank fees or wait 90 to 120 days for a paper check. It seems to me that the Federal Reserve is really on to something by trying to join other countries that restrict access to the payment system to consumer-facing banks. We're the only major country in the world that restricts access to the payment system to the consumer-facing banks. So I think you're on the right track to expand the opportunities to serve consumers. And I'm curious about what your thoughts are about the proposal, how it's going, when you expect the rule to be finalized?
Yeah, so as I understand it, this skinnier master account proposal's out for comment. It was sent out before I arrived, but I'm keenly interested in what the comments are. My mental model is that the critical infrastructure, the rails that the Fed runs, should be available to those that are applicable, that can comply with our rules and regulations. If I were to draw a hard distinction, this is a public good, and it's a public good that should be used by intermediaries. I don't want the public good to be used by consumers, by people that are on the front lines. But if financial institutions, new and old, want to comply with our regulations and take advantage of this public good, my general predilection is to encourage it.
Well, I think that's admirable and important. So that's it's out for comment now. Do you anticipate finalizing sometime this year?
I owe you a better answer on the timeline from here, and I pledge to give it to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I share a concern that was expressed by my colleague, Mr. Haggerty, that monetary policy should enjoy the committee not having to be as transparent about its process. I agree with Senator Haggerty also that the bank supervision component should not enjoy that same level of non-scrutiny. I think we need to scrutinize bank supervision. I'm concerned that that area was sort of hidden from public view for too long. And so I want to just echo what Mr. Haggerty said. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, ma'am. Senator Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And Chairman, thank you for coming on out. I actually wanted to build on something that Senator Warnock was going into about AI. And I guess I wanted to ask you, I've seen some public reporting that there was a report produced by Treasury staff for Secretary Besson, the Federal Reserve, and other financial regulators that outlines the risks associated with the AI boom. Are you familiar with this report?
I can't say that I've read that report, but it's certainly a discussion that the Secretary and I have had.
Is that something we can follow up on, get a sense of where the status of this report is?
Yeah, I'd be happy to both engage in the report and share with you my views.
Yeah, but regardless of the report itself, from what I understand, it's raising concerns that that much of our financial system right now rests upon AI meeting expectations for productivity gains as profitability, and as well as raising concerns about the concentration in a small number of firms that are heavily reliant on private market financing, specifically invested in data centers in particular. I wanted to just get a sense, do you agree with these underlying economic risks, or do you believe that that analysis is overstating the risks?
So I think this is the most important change in our economy in my adult lifetime. I think it has plenty of opportunities and also plenty of risks, and I take both of them seriously.
Yeah, I mean, it's something I'm trying to grapple with too. So I'm not expecting that you have a fully baked answer right now, but I hope we can work on this together, because I do think when we're looking at that future, trying to think through the data, I'm trying to think through what data is going to allow us to understand how exposed we are, what the concerns are. And I guess I would just ask you, as you're looking at the data, how would you assess our economy, the state of our economy, if you were to isolate out AI, which I know is driving so much of our growth right now? How is the rest of our economy doing?
So it's a fair question. We can start to do a little bit of that. So I mentioned in my opening statement the importance of capital expenditures to aggregate GDP. A good share of that CapEx boom is broadly in or around infrastructure related to artificial intelligence. Not exclusively, but it's part of the real story here. If I were to fast forward 12 months, whether these AI models continue to grow in their efficacy on some exponential curve or not, most of this CapEx is going into things like data centers, new sources of energy. And let's say there was a disappointment on the returns and what AI could do. Many of these investments have alternative uses. But if the question is really how much productivity do we expect to ultimately get from AI, the answer is I don't know, but I'm optimistic that over a longer time horizon, it'll be quite good for the United States and good for both parts of the dual mandate, lower prices and a stronger labor force.
Well, I hope we can work on this together and try to get a clearer understanding of just how much risk there is. And look, I'm glad to hear about this, this task force that you're putting together about the productivity side. I will just say the concern amongst young people in particular is very potent and very real. And we have to come up with an answer to them to help them feel reassured right now. Because I get it, they are, as you said, more native in the technology. But that doesn't necessarily help them when the companies themselves are saying, we don't need to hire as many junior associates or other jobs, especially on the more entry level side of things. No matter how much native fluency that they have or understanding and skills, if the businesses are saying, we don't need as many people at the younger, lower end. And so as you're dealing with this task force, I hope it's something that can interact with this committee. I hope we have a chance to be able to talk to some of them and hear from them in that capacity. But I also say, we need to make sure we're speaking human about this and not just getting kind of caught up in that. So I just wanted to flag that for you. One last thing I wanted to just touch base on is, Senator Reid mentioned the concerns about whatever we want to call it, mythos proofing or AI proofing, using AI to be able to shore up our vulnerabilities. A number of us have been talking to some of the financial sector, other critical infrastructure. I guess I just wanted to ask you, does the Fed have all it needs to be able to kind of shore up our vulnerabilities, patch up any vulnerabilities? Has that been a process that you all feel have confidence in so far?
Closer to a yes or no answer on that one.
I'm working on it, and I look forward to working with you on it as well.
Let us know how we can help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Moreno.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to you, Chairman Warsh, for being here. It is such a pleasure to have you here compared to your predecessor. I can't explain to you in words the feelings that I had when your predecessor testified versus the feelings of having you here. So truly appreciate the hard work. Some quick questions. You obviously we have a whole regulatory structure around banks. What's happened to deposits in American banks since last August? Have they gone up, stayed the same, or gone down?
Generally speaking, there are differences, but generally speaking, deposits held in banks is moving positively over that period.
And you worry about that, of course. You watch that, because if you had a massive deposit flight, that would be a problem, correct?
I worry about it, but I also use it as a helpful input. When average deposit balances are up, sometimes that could be for good or bad reasons. My sense of the underlying growth is more good than bad.
Right, but as a banker, if the bankers want deposits to go up.
They sure do.
And I just find that interesting as a data point, Mr. Chairman, because we've talked about, or we've had testimony anecdotally from the bank CEOs saying that stablecoins were going to drop deposits in banks. And I just want to point out for the record that the exact opposite has happened. So as they say, that was a bunch of blankety blank argument. Okay. You have two mandates. Let's talk about full employment for a second. If we have incentives that we put in place here legislatively for Americans not to work, does that round counter to your objective of full employment?
It doesn't make the Fed's life any easier.
Right. So if we actually incentivize somebody from actually participating and being productive in the workforce, that's not good. Things like, for example, we did in the Working Families Tax Cuts last year, which is to put in place where you have to verify twice a year whether you're working, volunteering, or studying, would be a positive demotivator for not working, correct? Meaning it encourages work.
I can't opine on the policies you make, but for the implications for the Fed, we're in the business of assessing potential growth. The more hours that are worked and the more productive those hours are, the stronger the economy can be.
Which is good in your mandate.
Yep.
And if you had tens of millions of people entering the country illegally, it makes your challenge of full employment more difficult also, correct?
I'm going to steer clear from immigration policy and leave it with you and the administration.
So pretend they're just naturally grown humans on the soil of America. If you have dramatically more humans in the United States looking for work, by definition, it makes full employment more difficult, correct?
So if those people are employed and are working and are productive, that's a good thing.
No, if they're not employed.
Well, that can be a challenge to one, if not both parts of our mandate.
Okay, let's talk about data centers really quick. So if you felt, or the Federal Reserve felt, that data center investment was driving inflation, what is the tool that you could use to combat that?
So I think that investment in data centers and in AI generally do affect the demand side of the economy, and we can see it, and we can see prices move up. But unlike some of these other shocks, with a lag, it also affects the supply side.
No, but what I'm saying is, if you felt that you had to do something about it, would it be accurate to say, really, you don't have a lot of tools? I think some of my colleagues think that you do have a magic wand. But ultimately, you'd have to raise interest rates. The idea would be you're going to make it more expensive to borrow money to build these things. Ultimately, that's basically the tool that you have, just roughly speaking, correct?
We have powerful tools to deal with what we deem to be inflation above target.
Right. So you would raise interest rates if you really is the tool that you'd use. Does it make any sense for us to be thinking that inflation is being caused by data center investment, and the answer would be to look to the Fed to raise interest rates, when in reality you have government that's providing tax subsidies, which is lowering the cost and thus encouraging more irrational investment? Doesn't it make more sense to say, let's not do any tax subsidies? Now, we can't do that here at the federal level because a lot of these subsidies are coming from cities, counties, and states. I actually believe, and I think, Chairman, we should think about providing 100% federal tax on these subsidies, so that if a company wants to take subsidies from some state, tax it at the federal level 100% to discourage it, because I think it is absolutely insanity for us to use taxpayer dollars to subsidize multi-billion-dollar companies. And by the way, those incentives don't exist. Would you agree that that seems reasonable?
Fiscal policy is your decision. I'm going to let you guys fight that one out.
Good.
Early, thank you. Senator Alsobrooks.
All right, thank you so much, Chair Scott and Ranking Member Warren, for holding today's hearing. And Chairman Warsh, it's good to see you again. Before we talk about the economy, I want to briefly return to your confirmation hearing, where under questioning from Senator Gallego and myself, you said that the president never, quote, generally or specifically instructed you to lower interest rates. And your testimony at the time did contradict reporting by the Wall Street Journal. So Senator Gallego and I sent you a letter on April 26th clarifying your testimony, and we have not yet received a response. So as we stated in our letter, President Trump told the Wall Street Journal that he thinks you have to lower, his quote was, he thinks you have to lower interest rates. And under your sworn testimony in this committee, you said that the president never generally or specifically instructed you on interest rates. And so I wonder whether you will just commit to responding to our letter.
Sure. I stand by every word that I said at my confirmation hearing, and now I have a 7-week track record subsequent to that, and you can judge not just my words but my actions. And I'm happy to continue the discussion with you about this topic if you think it's fruitful. I will say I've spent 7 weeks doing a lot of hard business of reform, but I'm happy to continue to engage.
Okay, and you will respond to the letter that Senator Gallego and I sent to you.
I'm happy to find the letter. I think it came to me before I was confirmed to the Fed. I'm happy to find it and work with you and your colleagues to answer any questions you have.
Okay, thank you. Now, Federal Governor Christopher Waller recently announced a framework to radically transform the Fed systems of 12 regional reserve banks, and Congress deliberately created a centralized system of 12 regional banks to ensure that regional economies and communities are represented when the Fed makes consequential decisions. The Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, which serves Maryland, employs over 100 of my constituents at the bank's Baltimore branch, and I share our ranking member's concern that these changes are being pursued without consideration of Congress. And so do you agree that regional presidents and board directors are responsible for day-to-day operations under the Federal Reserve Act and not the Federal Reserve Board in Washington?
So I love the structure of the Board of Governors and the Reserve Banks in the Federal Reserve Act, and I love the Humphrey Hawkins testimony. I am obligated to give it to you. As the Federal Reserve Act makes clear, as you know, is the reserve banks run operations and their budgets are reviewed and approved by the Board of Governors. With respect more broadly to the proposal you suggested, I think we need to try to do two things at the same time. Be good stewards of taxpayer money and continue to drive efficiencies throughout the system. And at the same time, respect the independence of the reserve banks so that they can show up in Washington at an FOMC meeting and feel as though they have the resources at their disposal to argue their point of view. My addition to what's already been said publicly is my view is the 12 reserve banks should be 12 centers of excellence. And if there is some savings that we're necessarily driving through consolidation of overlapping functions, they should at the same time be able to build out capabilities and solve any of a number of problems of economic policy that are inside of our remit. I've encouraged the 12 reserve banks to think about what they could do to have a center of excellence.
So, Mr. Chair, your answer is yes, you do agree that the regional presidents and board directors are responsible for day-to-day operations under that act.
I do believe that's subject to the oversight of the Board of Governors in the statute.
Okay. Just one last question. Now, you've suggested that artificial intelligence will generate productivity gains that will reduce inflation and help lower interest rates. And I'm optimistic as well about the promise of AI, but we need to be really clear-eyed, I think, in considering the whole economy and the impact there. The Fed has two mandates, low inflation and maximum employment, and you've spoken often about AI's impact on prices and inflation, but inflation is still high. So it's important that the Fed also addresses the employment piece of this mandate, and just as urgently, the Fed should consider who benefits from AI. So some economic models for AI's economic effects foresee gigantic returns for capital holders, but stagnant wages and job losses for workers. So as it relates to AI, what specifically is the Fed doing, studying, or preparing for under your maximum employment mandate?
So I endorse both parts of the dual mandate, and I don't want to suggest that productivity and the AI wave only impacts one part of it. We've got no legislative orphans, and I think that the effect on the labor markets is real and something we're thinking long and hard about, short-term, medium-term, and long-term.
Okay. Thank you.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Warsh, welcome back to the committee for the first time as the chairman of the Federal Reserve. I was proud to vote for your confirmation back in May, and it's great to have you come back. I understand we do this on the committee, Mr. Chairman, twice a year. I'm looking forward to continued dialogues with you and before this committee for many years to come. You're very familiar with my state, Indiana. We've talked about Indiana a great deal. There's no state in America that has a stronger manufacturing base than Indiana. Manufacturing jobs are the biggest share of our workforce in our state and accounts for about a quarter of our state's economy. For decades, though, policymakers here in Washington have turned a blind eye as foreign countries erode our manufacturing base and rely on artificially cheap labor. But under President Trump, we have a renewed focus on fighting back and protecting America's manufacturing edge. In addition to President Trump's tariffs, we are helping American companies compete against foreign competition by investing in new technologies that help American workers make better quality goods more efficiently than countries that rely on cheap labor. Mr. Chairman, business investment in the U.S. is surging right now. Fixed investment grew at a rate of 10.1% in the first quarter of 2026. Can you talk more about that and about how rising investment in new technologies like AI and robotics can strengthen America's competitive position against the rest of the world, especially when it comes to manufacturing?
So thank you, Senator Banks. The CapEx surge is remarkable. This is a CapEx investment boom that the country hasn't seen in more than a generation. It is the seed corn for productivity and GDP improvement over the next decade. The way these waves typically go historically, which doesn't mean it has to happen this time, is a surge in CapEx with some lag leads to stronger economic potential, stronger growth, higher wages and more productivity. This surge is different. It's happened faster. It's probably going to be bigger, and it's accelerating in real time. The effect on the Fed's mandate is something we're taking very seriously. But I would far rather have a capital expenditure boom than have large corporate profits go back into share buybacks and dividends. Investing here is a good thing, and all other things being equal, it's going to have fruits for the American economy.
Good. Later this year, bank regulators are expected to finalize new rules covering capital and stress testing. The Fed's new rules are a world away from the harmful Basel Endgame proposal that the Biden regulators tried to jam through, which would have hit working families in Indiana with a hidden tax on every mortgage and small business loan. But the transition still has to be handled well. These capital rules touch every part of a bank's planning. Implementing the new rules with a clear and organized timeline is critical. Will you commit to coordinating the rollout of these new rules across all major bank regulators so community banks especially can rely on clear guidance to follow?
Yeah, Senator, I think clarity here is really important. These rules, as you know, are out for comment. I'm keenly interested in the comments as they come in. I think it is a very good thing if the bank regulators can speak with one voice. What we saw going into the 2008 financial crisis was a lot of regulatory arbitrage where institutions were choosing the regulator that best served their needs. I would love to have one standard, and I'm committed to work with the other regulators to see if we can achieve it. I'll just make one other point. You referenced the stress tests. The stress tests were a design and idea that we came up with one dark evening in the 2008 financial crisis. Stress tests have been used from that year till this year. I'm open-minded to reforms around the stress tests, so the stress tests aren't merely a compliance exercise, but help reveal both to the regulator and institutions what would really happen under a series of stresses.
Good. When you were here during the confirmation hearing, you and I talked about the China threat, something that you focused on for years. I know you're only 2 months into the job as chairman, but any updates or on how you can assess the threat that China poses to the dollar's role as the world's reserve economy?
So they're pacing power. They are the AI, the fight over AI is one of a proxy fight between these two economies that are striving for significance and influence over the next decade. I think we are on the front end of those technologies, but I don't want to sound complacent about it. And like with all technologies, they can be used by friends or adversaries. And so if there's a subject upon which I've been focused related to this in my first 7 weeks is making sure the institutions we regulate and the Fed itself is aware of our vulnerabilities. And I still think we've got some work to do on that.
Good. Thank you. I yield back.
Senator Blunt, Rochester.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Warren. It's good to see you, Chairman Warsh. I will tell you, I've been in and out of the room because I have 4 committees happening at the exact same time. And so going back and forth, and I know a lot of the things that I wanted to talk about or questions I wanted to ask, some have already been asked, so I may not use the whole time. But when we talked before during your confirmation hearing, I raised questions about primarily 3 things. One was the independence of the Federal Reserve, and you've spoken a lot about that today in the hearing. I talked about transparency around reforms and what does regime change mean, and how does this connect with our regional Federal Reserve boards. And then I also shared with you just my real deep concerns about the impact of AI as well as the opportunities for AI and just the changing landscape, particularly when we talk about that mandate of full employment, maximum employment. And lastly, I would also say really important to me, and I shared that with you as well, is that the focus primarily a lot of times what is talked about is the Wall Street side and not the Main Street side. And so how Main Street has equal footing to Wall Street. And so a lot of the questions that have come, one of the things that you shared in your testimony was about the task forces that you have established, which I think is a really good idea. And I think the choices of things that you're focused on, from communication, to AI and the influence, all of those things are really important. And I think some of my other colleagues might have asked questions. I was on the AI one in particular. I hope that there will be the inclusion of other voices beyond economic experts and tech individuals, but actually families, businesses, people that are actually both consuming and impacted by AI. So if you could talk a little bit more about the makeup of that one in particular, and how you will include people both in the task force and how you will include Main Street in your ongoing work at the Fed, because before we had the Fed Listens tours, and I heard positive from both folks on the Federal Reserve side as well as the community side. So could you talk about the inclusion of Main Street on the task forces, and then ongoing in your work, how will you include Main Street?
Yeah, so let me address both those questions, Senator. First, on the task forces, we have 15 people across 5 task forces. I think there's a breadth of views, perspectives, expertise. They're all fantastic. They aren't decision makers. You're talking to one of the ultimate decision makers. And I believe, like you do in the reserve banks, the reserve bank presidents bring a breadth of views from their communities, from their businesses, and they and we are going to be the deciders about what to do with these. I don't want you to think that I've outsourced anything to these task forces other than coming up with new ideas.
Which is fine. My question is more related to the makeup. One of the concerns I have, even on technology, we've seen incredible advances where voices were not included of other folks. And so therefore we had technology that mistakenly took a black judge and thought that he was a criminal based on bad input of how the technology. So I'm talking about the input in the task forces as well as your ongoing input. Yeah. I don't know if you will continue with like Fed Listens or any of those things, but how will you get feedback from community organizations, small businesses, consumers?
Yeah. I don't mean to give you an excuse. I've been here 7 weeks. We've been pushing for reforms, but you have my commitment. The focus under my chairmanship at the Fed is what's happening in the real economy. And by the way, there are plenty of people on Wall Street who are upset with me already that I'm somehow not feeding them all the information they'd gotten before, and if they only had my dot, everything would be swell. My message to them is play the ball, don't play the Fed. By that I mean figure out what's happening in the real economy, respond to data that's happening in the real economy, rather than somehow suggest that we're going to be focused on Wall Street. So you have my commitment to focus on Main Street because it matters mostly to our dual mandate.
Well, I appreciate the time. I will also follow up with questions for the record, and also particularly on the data piece as well. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, please do so by Wednesday, July 22nd. The chairman will have 45 days from that day to submit your responses to questions for the record. This has been a great hearing. Thank you. Well done so far, so good. We look forward to even more time that we could spend together. And I frankly believe that the American people will have their trust restored under your leadership as relates to the Federal Reserve.
Thank you,
Meeting
Mr.
adjourned.
Chairman.
Absolutely.
Colleague, Lindsey Graham. He was a statesman and a friend to everybody here. He had just a unique ability to bring levity to a situation, no matter how serious it was. Justice Kagan and I recall his engagement with you when you were coming through your confirmation hearing that we're still laughing about today. And I think it allowed you to show a very human side of yourself. But Lindsey had that ability to do just that, and I think at very appropriate times. And we're going to miss him very dearly, and I just want everybody to know that he, his family, and our staff are in our prayers. To turn to the matter at hand, this is the third and final hearing of fiscal year 2027 cycle for the Financial Services and General Government Subcommittee. First, I'd like to welcome our distinguished witnesses, Justice Kagan and Justice Barrett of the United States Supreme Court. It's been a number of years since Supreme Court justices testified before the Senate, so I want to thank you both for being here today. The work at the Supreme Court is of paramount importance, and I look forward to hearing from you about the resources that the court needs to do that work. Before I turn to the Supreme Court's budget request, I want to direct a few words to my colleagues and to those of you that are here in attendance today about the actual purpose of this hearing. Unlike federal departments, the Supreme Court is not a creature of Congress, but it's a creature of the Constitution itself. It's equal in dignity to the Congress and to the President. And unlike the legislative and executive powers, the founders crafted the judicial power to be independent from the political branches. That independent judicial authority, characterized in Alexander Hamilton's words by neither force nor will, but merely judgment, is the best expedient to secure a steady, upright, and an impartial administration of the laws. It's crucial that we respect that independence, which is embedded in the separation of powers that forms the backbone of American government. The judicial branch is not wholly insulated from Congress, however. Congress's power of the purse imparts not only the authority, but the responsibility to fund every part of the government, including the Supreme Court. It's therefore important for our branches to work together to ensure that the court has the resources necessary to perform its constitutional duties. With these facts in mind, I want to be clear that this hearing is about the Supreme Court's physical, operational, and security needs, and will be conducted in light of the court's unique relationship to Congress. This hearing is not a forum for discussion about the merits of specific cases, past, present, or future. It's not about when the justices should recuse themselves from cases or anything along those lines. I encourage my colleagues to focus their questions accordingly, and as a reminder, each senator will have one round of 8 minutes to ask their questions. I also expect that our guests today will maintain order in the hearing room so that we conclude our business with efficiency and civility. We'll have no tolerance for interruptions today, and any demonstration or disorderly conduct will result in prompt removal. The Supreme Court's budget request for fiscal year 2027 seeks $2,007 million in discretionary funding. This amount is $13.9 million, or 7.2% increase over the total amount of discretionary funding provided for the Supreme Court for fiscal year 2026. The requested increase is driven by an increasingly dangerous threat environment and the recognition that more resources are needed to counteract this concerning reality. There's no denying that we're experiencing a disturbing level of violence against those who serve in the highest levels of government. President Trump has now survived 3 assassination attempts in the past 2 years. Yesterday was the 2nd anniversary of the attempted assassination in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the assassin's bullet actually drew blood. But for a millimeter, President Trump would have been killed. Tragically, 1 American was killed, and 2 more were critically injured. That's hardly the only instance. Our colleague Rand Paul suffered felonious assault. Someone firebombed Governor Josh Shapiro's home. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise narrowly survived an assassination attempt as more congressmen stood in the line of fire. Of course, political violence is not solely directed to elected officials, as we recently saw this with the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk. And particularly relevant for today's hearing, the Supreme Court has not escaped this dark trend of politically motivated violence. Following the 2022 leak of the Dobbs draft opinion, a man who was intent, I presume, on preserving the Roe decision tried to kill Justice Kavanaugh at his home, bringing with him a gun, a knife, pepper spray, zip ties, lock-picking equipment, and duct tape. Separately, Justice Alito's staff opened an envelope to find a white powdery substance inside. Ultimately, the substance was harmless, but it was intended to terrorize the court and intimidate and obstruct operations. We also observed hundreds of demonstrators gathering outside the justices' homes, attempting to intimidate and influence them, an apparent violation of 18 U.S.C. 1507, yet without a single arrest by the Department of Justice. Justice Barrett was the target of a swatting attack intended to create an environment that could have created potential injury for her or her family. These disturbing instances force us to force us to confront the reality that the physical security of each member of the Supreme Court is a matter of constitutional consequence. Though maintaining operational security might require obscuring some details, I'm hopeful that the justices today will be able to testify in a manner that helps us understand these threats. Accompanying the rise in physical threats is also a rise in cyber threats. In January, a man pleaded guilty to hacking the Supreme Court's electronic filing system at least 25 times. We've observed a surge in cyber threats directed toward the lower courts. It's not hyperbole to say that the attacks of this nature can be a matter of life and death. Sealed court documents can include information about confidential informants and classified national security information, not to mention Social Security numbers, sensitive medical records, and trade secrets that would be essential to our economic dominance. The risk of insecure and unreliable electronic court records is not a risk that we can accept. To defend against these threats and avoid the proliferation of attacks currently facing the lower courts, the Supreme Court's budget seeks a modest program increase to enhance its cybersecurity personnel. Thank you for appearing before the subcommittee today. Justices Kagan and Barrett, I'm pleased to have you before us today, and I look forward to our testimony. But before you begin, I now want to turn to my colleague, the ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Jack Reed, for his opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman Hagerty, and for convening this very important hearing. And I want to thank Justice Kagan and Justice Barrett for appearing before us. I also want to, again, note the passing of a dear colleague, Senator Lindsey Graham. I served in the House and the Senate with Lindsey, and I will describe him briefly as a passionate patriot. Indeed, he was that. Madam Justice, this is a long overdue opportunity for us to question the members of the court about its budget and operations, and I'll stress budget and operations. This is, I believe, the first time since 2011 that a justice has testified before the Senate, and I would hope this would be an annual occurrence, not a decade-by-decade occurrence. The Supreme Court is, under our Constitution, the final arbitrator of the law of the land, but it is still accountable, Congress, for taxpayers' funds which you use to operate. And today's hearing is about your fiscal FY 2027 budget request, a budget that's grown significantly in the last few years. We know, as the chairman has pointed out, that you have faced a series of threatening attempts, you and your colleagues, assassination attempts to online cybersecurity threats. And we know that the number of threats are increasing each year, and it is a substantial justification for budget increases to protect the court and protect the Constitution. So I look forward from hearing from both of you about these issues and the needs that you have to protect yourself and your colleagues. In regard to these threats, the court created its own residential security operation, and Congress responded to the request with a $28 million appropriation. But weeks after that CR was signed, the court began privately lobbying for another $30 million. And we understand security is important, but we also understand that this should be an open process and that your request should come to us and the committee to be disposed of as we typically do with all appropriations. And I would urge you to adopt that practice. This committee has responded to the court's request, as I said, for more money. And we hope to do it again, but I must point out that unless we have a top-line budget, both domestic and defense, it's going to be difficult to fund domestic, particularly domestic agencies like the court. And I hope that the Chair Collins and Vice Chair Murray will reach that point very soon. The other thing I would just point out is that, and I know this came up this morning, is that you have adopted a code of ethics. But a code of ethics without effective enforcement is more aspirational than practical. And I would hope that this year in your budget request, you would include funds for enforcement structure as well as simply the code existing. I'm very honored, we all are, by your presence today. And I indeed look forward to listening to your responses and to cooperating with you so that we can strengthen the court and provide the support you need to carry out one of the most principal duties in America, which is making sure the Constitution is alive and well throughout the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Reid. And now I'd like to recognize Justice Kagan. Justice Kagan, I look forward to your opening remarks, and I'll remind you that your full statement will be added to the record.
Want to build a rack pipeline that actually scales in production? Then focus on what actually moves the needle. Retrieval quality, system design, cost-performance balance. Get this right, and everything else becomes optimization. Join Scaler's free masterclass on designing a scalable rack pipeline. Get practical knowledge on advanced rack architecture and building production-ready systems. Register now.
Messi refused to let destiny decide his team's story. Now he has the chance to write the greatest chapter of Argentina's history.
Incredible scenes, absolutely incredible.
England versus Argentina, live and exclusive, only on Z5.
Thank you, Chairman Hagerty, and thank you, Ranking Member Reid, for giving Justice Barrett and me the opportunity to appear here before you today. I hope we can do it more than once every 3 decades. That doesn't seem too much to ask for, to present the Supreme Court's fiscal year 2027 budget request. I'd like to start, Senator Hagerty, if I might, the same way you did, by speaking a bit about Senator Graham. And I did this this morning as well. But you've provided me with I talked this morning about exactly what you talked about. First, I want to say that the entire court wants to send its condolences to Senator Graham's family and all his colleagues and friends in the Senate and elsewhere. All of us have been through the Judiciary Committee, and most of us through the Judiciary Committee while Senator Graham sat on it. And there is a great deal of affection throughout the entire court for Senator Graham, a great deal of affection and respect. I want to add, though, my personal a note here. I was nominated to the court by a Democratic president. It is not very often that a Republican votes for a nominee from a Democratic president. And similarly, it's not very often that a Democratic senator votes for a nominee of a Republican president. Those are the times we live in. And it's especially uncommon when such a cross-party, if you will, votes come from somebody in a deep red or deep blue state. And notwithstanding that, Senator Graham voted for my confirmation to be a Supreme Court justice. And I was very grateful for that, and I was enormously impressed by the respect with which Senator Graham treated me throughout the process, the seriousness with which he took the process, and as I say, grateful for his vote at the end of the process. But Senator Hagerty, you referenced something, in this last day or so, everybody has been talking about how funny Senator Graham was. But it's harder to make somebody else look funny than to be funny yourself. And I have to say that day, Senator Graham made me look funny. And that conversation that we had about what I was doing on Christmas one year is the conversation that I was told by many people afterwards sealed the deal on my confirmation. So I was very thankful to Senator Graham for that and for all his kindnesses through that process. And again, just want to repeat my and the broader court's deepest condolences to his sister, to all his friends and family on his untimely passing.
Thank you very much for that, Justice Kagan. I appreciate that. In fact, his sister is going to be sworn in during the course of this, so you may see some of us moving in and out to address that. Thank you.
I would like to note at the outset how appreciative we are of this subcommittee's constructive engagement and support. You and your staff have been with us each step of the way as we've added security funding to meet the challenges of these times. I personally have enjoyed meeting with a couple of you about these matters, and our respective staffs also speak and share information regularly. I look forward to our future work. The Supreme Court's funding is provided separately from the lower federal courts and split between two appropriations, one for salaries and expenses related to the daily operations of the court, and another for care of the buildings and grounds. We will address the operating budget today. The architect of the Capitol will submit a separate statement concerning our buildings and grounds. The court's operating budget funds the daily activities you'd expect in any federal courthouse, such as library and research services, case management, visitor services, IT, facility management, and security. We carry out our work with relatively modest funding. Our budget represents just 2% of the judiciary branch's total funding, which in turn represents 0.1% of the federal budget. Nonetheless, we take our responsibility as fiscal stewards very seriously. In fiscal year 2027, the court is requesting an additional $14 million, a 7% increase for salaries and expenses. Over the last 5 fiscal years, the Supreme Court's funding needs have grown on average 15% per year. Aside from annual inflationary increases, recent growth in the court's budget has been almost entirely for security expenses. The majority of last year's funding increase went to shifting the responsibility for residential security from the Marshal Service to the Supreme Court Police. And Ranking Member Reed, I'd be delighted to speak at some greater length about what you talked about our receiving one appropriation and then another, specifically for this purpose, for enhancing residential security. I first joined the court in 2010. Our security was very different at that time. The Supreme Court Police focused almost exclusively on protecting the building. And as for cybersecurity, well, our IT department focused on supporting the latest BlackBerry devices. I didn't have a security team of my own and was accompanied by security personnel only when I participated in work-related public events. We began expanding our security program in earnest in 2017, initially at the behest of members of Congress. We engaged government and private industry experts to evaluate our needs. We started by expanding personal security beyond the Chief Justice so that associate justices also received small security details, much too small as it later turned out. As threat assessments called for larger details and as overtime costs correspondingly rose, we requested funding for more officers, vehicles, and support staff. As events at the Capitol and other federal courthouses revealed our buildings' vulnerabilities, we also added new physical security systems. When personal threats increased following the leak of the court's Dobbs opinion, we expanded our residential security and threat assessment activities still further. Similarly, as online attacks grew in number and sophistication, we requested additional cybersecurity resources. Our strategy has been consistent: expand incrementally but effectively to meet evolving security challenges. We aren't alone in this. Although orders of magnitude smaller, the Supreme Court's police department is modeled after your own Capitol Police Department. The two departments have matching pay tables and similar organizational charts. They work closely together on threats pertaining to the Capitol campus and beyond. They also face many of the same challenges, especially officer recruitment and retention, and they have implemented many of the same solutions to address those challenges. Over the last 5 years, the Capitol Police Department's annual operating needs have increased 70%, a figure similar to the courts. For fiscal year 2027, Capitol Police requested a 16% increase. As neighbors, our two police departments will continue to work cooperatively together. Our respective police departments' growing needs are obvious given current conditions. The Capitol Police Chief recently testified that threats against Congress are up 50% this year. The Supreme Court police expect a smaller but still substantial 38% annual increase in threats this year, which follows a 25% increase last year. For some of us, those threats have come very close indeed, as the chairman indicated, and all of us live with the knowledge that they may again materialize. But as the Chief Justice has said most recently in his annual statement, all members of the court continue to do their jobs as they believe legally right, adjudicating cases without fear or favor. We are grateful to the Supreme Court Police for all they do to support our ability to do so, and grateful to our appropriators in the Senate and the House for the resources that are necessary to achieve that goal. While we cannot comment on decisions or pending cases, Justice Barrett and I are happy to answer any budget-related questions you may have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm going to now turn it to the committee chair, Senator Collins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me welcome our distinguished witnesses today. It's a great honor to have you here to respond to our questions. I could not help but think, as I heard Justice Kagan's comments about the 38% increase in the number of threats, that it is increasingly dangerous to be a Supreme Court justice these days. And it's appalling to me that some of the rhetoric is coming from public officials on both sides of the aisle who should know better than to levy personal and political attacks against the judiciary and the court specifically. For example, a senator stood in front of the Supreme Court building and called out two members by name, saying that they had released the whirlwind and that they will pay the price. Other public officials have called the court corrupt, out of control, and serving an extremist agenda. This overheated language, this completely inappropriate rhetoric against the Supreme Court endangers the lives of the justices and erodes public trust in our system of government. I believe that all of us must avoid that kind of dangerous and disturbing rhetoric because it could, in fact, trigger violence. So with that as an introduction, let me turn to some specific questions for you. Justice Barrett, the Supreme Court is taking over residential security for the justices from the U.S. Marshals Service. What was the rationale for that change?
Thank you, Chair Collins. The Marshals was always designed to be temporary. They couldn't continue to staff us. In fact, one reason for our supplemental request that was somewhat unexpected is that the Marshals unexpectedly told us that they would not be able to continue providing the residential protection and that they were going to end it quicker than we had anticipated. They themselves were just stretched thin. So we had always wanted to take it over ourselves, but we were forced to do that on a quicker timeline. And we are now fully doing it within the Supreme Court Police through a combination of our full-time officers and contractors.
एक बात समझ लीजिए, ना बीमारी दुनिया से कहीं जाने वाली है और ना ही हॉस्पिटल के खर्चे। बस आपको ये सोचना होगा कि हॉस्पिटल का बिल कौन भरेगा, आप या आपकी इंश्योरेंस पॉलिसी। आज ही पॉलिसी बाजार से हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस लीजिए। पॉलिसी बाजार पे 1 करोड़ का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 550 रुपए हर महीने से शुरू होता है।
Thank you. Justice Kagan, in the Supreme Court's building and grounds account, there is a request for $6.5 million to begin the process for an exterior screening facility for visitors to the court. Could you explain why the court needs that separate facility?
Yes, right now visitors walk into the court and that's where they're checked. That's where they are sent through a magnometer and, checked for weapons and so forth. And just as the Capitol decided that for security reasons it wished to create a visitor center that was off the main premises, so all the appropriate security checks could be done off premises, that's what we're looking into as well.
Thank you. Justice Kagan, as you know, the Federal Judicial Center publishes a reference manual for federal judges to use when handling cases that involve scientific evidence. The center, whose board is chaired by the Chief Justice, published its latest version of the manual on December 31st of last year. I understand that you wrote the foreword to this edition. I am aware of concerns that this version included a chapter that, in the judgment of some people, disfavored a particular class of litigants by suggesting that contested issues were not, in fact, contested. Are you aware of this controversy?
I have become aware of it. As you say, I wrote the foreword. The foreword is just a page-long thing that the Federal Judicial Center asked me to provide, as other justices have provided for other editions of the book. So I hadn't read the chapter in question prior to that time. Actually, I still haven't read it, but I know that the controversy that you're referring to, which is about the climate science chapter, and whether there were statements made within that chapter treating as uncontested things that many people continue to contest. And the head of the Federal Judicial Center, Judge Rosenberg, has engaged with the people who have made those criticisms and those objections. In the end, the Federal Judicial Center has withdrawn that chapter from the book on the view that anything that gets so many people riled up and anything that so many people think, wow, that was way too hasty. There's still lots of disagreement about things that you presented as entirely agreed upon, should not be in a book of this kind. The entire purpose of this book really is not to take positions on contested and contestable matters. It's to help judges, assist judges with respect to scientific issues, but not on not with any kind of slant either way. And because so many people did think that that chapter was slanted in a particular direction, Judge Rosenberg decided to take it out of the book. I know that she is engaged with members of Congress about her decision, about where to, what to do next, about how to make sure that the processes that the Federal Judicial Center uses are good ones, and that a situation like this does not come up again. The Federal Judicial Center is a generally terrific organization, and that's why, I was glad when they asked me, write a few paragraphs introducing the book. This is a book that's existed for 30 years and has in different editions and has assisted countless numbers of judges during that time. So I was glad to do that, and I think that Judge Rosenberg's hope is that things will be learned from this experience, and that we won't, that the Federal Judicial Center won't ever find itself in this position again.
My thanks to you both for your service.
Thank you, Senator Collins. And I want to thank both of you for appearing today again. Senator Collins alluded to the fact that it's becoming increasingly dangerous to serve as a Supreme Court justice. The statistics underscore that. But beyond the statistics, there's a human aspect to all of this as well. That's the fact that you and your families have to live in an escalated threat environment. And so I'd like to start with you, Justice Kagan. You've been on the bench for 16 years at the Supreme Court. You've seen the environment change, and if you could just elaborate on how it's changed and how it's affected you and your family.
I joined the court in 2010, and it was an entirely different world then. We did everything, I just walked out on the street. I had no security with me at any time. I drove back and forth to work by myself. Every so often when I went out to do a major speech, security personnel would accompany me there. But honestly, none of us particularly thought about it at that time. We started thinking about it in 2016, and the occasion of that was Justice Scalia's passing. Justice Scalia went down to Texas for a trip, and when he died, there were no security personnel in the immediate environment. The closest marshals were some 2 hours away, and that made people a little bit sit up and take notice. And right after that, two members of the House, Congressman Issa and Congressman Cummings, they were in the midst of an exploration of the various security services provided to people in government, and particularly with respect to the Secret Service. And the way that Chief Justice described the conversation that they had with him to us was this, that Congressman Issa and Cummings came into the Chief Justice's office and said, we've been taking a long, hard look at security in different parts of the government, and we think you're out of your mind. That they said, the office of the director of the Office of Personnel Management has more security than the Supreme Court justices do. And surely the Supreme Court justices are doing more things that are more controversial on a more continuing basis than the director of the Office of Personnel Management. So the Chief Justice came into our conference one day and sort of told us about this conversation and said, things have got to change. And we started to change them. I mean, there was a little bit of like, oh, do we really need this? Because, it's more pleasant to live without security than it is to live with security. So there was a little bit of resistance, but I think people recognized the wisdom of what the congressman had told us. And so we started incrementally and, to increase security presence. We started to think about each individual justice having a separate detail that knew their practices, that knew the way they lived, that knew the kinds of security needs that they had. And then the big ramp up after that, there was sort of an incremental ramp up, and the big ramp up came with the leak of the Dobbs opinion when the threat level really dramatically increased for some of my colleagues. And that's when there was, what had been going on acquired even more urgency. So I think that's the history of the thing. Right now, each of us has a detail of between 4 and 8 security people. They accompany us pretty much everywhere. So life has changed a great deal for all of us.
It certainly has since 2010. Even yesterday here at the Capitol, there was a man apprehended and arrested pulling up to one of the barricades here at the Capitol asking for directions to the Supreme Court, and he had a gun in his lap. So it's striking, and I'm glad we're focusing on this now. Justice Barrett, you've obviously served a shorter period of time than Justice Kagan, but I'd like to know your perspective as well and how it's affecting you, your family, and what you've perceived as the...
What a smashing victory!
Big Basket. Everything you need delivered now.
threat?
Thank you, Chairman Haggerty. Yeah, I've experienced it in a very personal way, and I can share just a few of my own experiences. There was a time, and it was shortly after the Dobbs leak, when the threats to my life were particularly intense, and my security detail thought it was a good idea for me to have a bulletproof vest. So I took it home from the house, went into my bedroom, threw it down, and turned around, and my 12-year-old son was in the doorway, and he said, "What's that?" And when I took this job, I didn't really anticipate being in the position of having to explain to one of my children what a bulletproof vest was and why his mom had it. So that was one issue. It was reported in the news that about 6 weeks ago, I was the victim of a swatting incident at my house. One of our teenage sons walked out the front door, getting ready to head out with friends, and the street was full of county policemen, and then I also had my residential security presence there. They had responded to a false alarm saying that there was gunshots being fired inside my home, and I was very grateful for the residential security because they were able to coordinate with the county police before the county police entered my home. And the other thing I'll say, and this is not unique to me and my colleagues, but this is experienced by people throughout the federal judiciary, are anonymized deliveries, and they often come in the name of the murdered son of one of our district judges. The message that these, pizzas and other things that are sent to us, is fairly clear. They're often sent to members of our immediate and extended families as well. They're meant to intimidate and they're meant to harass. And as the Chief Justice said in his year-end report, justices and judges throughout the country continue to do their jobs without fear or favor, but it is a very threatening environment.
And if I might add just a teeny bit, this is a problem that not only Supreme Court justices face, but judges all across the United States, federal judges and state judges as well. And most of them have considerably less in the way of security resources than we do. So it's an especial issue to try to figure out how to get better security for judges all over the United States, even as we focus today on the Supreme Court's security needs.
I'll come to another point that I think concerns all of us, and it has an impact on your security as well, and that's the leaking of information coming from the Supreme Court. If you think about the leaks of confidential Supreme Court communications, the impact of that, as you've both described, the Dobbs case is obviously the most famous one, and that precipitated, untold intimidation, threats, an attempt to murder one of the justices. Incredibly sad, but there have been others. In 2024, there was a leak about court deliberations over cases that involve presidential immunity. Just in April of this year, there was a leak of internal memoranda discussing requests to stay President Obama's Clean Power Plan. And if you think about it, the Dobbs decision, I think, underscores this. The leaking of this information dramatically increases the security risk on justices. And Justice Kagan, I'll start with you. Are these sorts of leaks from the Supreme Court acceptable?
They're not. It dramatically increases security risks. It also dramatically changes the way we do our business internally, or at least has the potential to do so. I mean, the way we relate to each other depends so much on honest communication among the 9 of us. And if the 9 of us don't have trust in one another and don't have trust in one another and all the people who work for us, then those kinds of honest conversations that we need to do our business are not going to take place, or they're at least going to be frustrated. So I think it is a problem that has frustrated every single one of the justices because of the security issues, but because it's just not the way a court should operate, and not the way a court can operate if it wants to have the kind of deliberations that are the backbone of what we do.
I appreciate that, and I really appreciate you making this statement publicly and on the record, because I think it's critically important that a leader like yourself make this clear to everybody. Justice Barrett, I'll just close with you. Are there any actions undertaken, any changes in procedures that will prevent leaks like this from occurring?
We're doing our best. We have instituted protocols to try to keep better track of who has access to documents, who's touched documents, where they've been printed. We have always required employees to sign a confidentiality agreement, but recently we began requiring employees to sign a non-disclosure agreement. which we do have carve-outs for whistleblowers and that sort of thing, and those carve-outs go beyond what federal statutes require. But we're hoping that driving the need for confidentiality home with these NDAs will just be an additional check on employees who are sharing information inappropriately and often illegally.
Well, for all the reasons Justice Kagan mentioned, I can't say I can't support it any more than I do. I appreciate the effort and thank you. I'll turn it now to Ranking Member Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, Justices, thank you for your presence and your testimony. I just want to pick up on a point that Senator Collins made about some outrageous statements that are being made by public figures, and I can't think of a more prominent one than the President of the United States. So on February 20th, following your decision on tariffs, he said, "Disgrace to our nation, fools, lapdogs for the rhinos and radical left Democrats, and very unpatriotic and disloyal to the Constitution." And he was describing the Supreme Court. On March 15, he posted, "Our country was unnecessarily ransacked by the United States Supreme Court, which has become little more than a weaponized and an unjust political organization." Now, I don't agree with anything he said, but if there's anyone in the country that commands more attention, it's the president, and I think that behavior is very dangerous to the court and to our whole system. And I just want that to be part of the record. Justice Kagan, you asked for an
If I could, Senator,
please.
Wherever these come from, whatever political figure says them, whatever party that political figure is a member of, these statements are really unhelpful. They're dangerous in terms of individual justices' security, and they're not appropriate in the way to treat a coordinated branch of government. I think that Chief Justice had a year-end statement last year where he talked about this issue, and he talked about criticism is fair game. I mean, go for it. It's life in the big city is that you're subject to all kinds of criticism. But intimidation is a different thing entirely. And when political figures of any stripe are trying to intimidate judges and justices to do things that they like rather than the things that they don't, that's where we really have crossed the line.
I think you're exactly right, Your Honor, and you said it well. You wanted a moment to talk about the process where the $28 million request was made through appropriation channels, and then $30 million appeared suddenly through private channels. Please.
Yeah, I think Justice Barrett referenced this a bit. And first off, we apologize if we did anything so procedurally improper. But the reason for the additional ask, if you will, was that we were suddenly confronted with the loss of U.S. Marshal protection. And we thought that we were going to have U.S. Marshal protection at our residences for another 6 months, and all of a sudden learned from the Justice Department that that was going to be impossible. And so we had to do some sort of quick footwork to try to get additional monies in order to cover that 6-month gap. And as I say, if we did that in a way that was procedurally less than optimal, my apologies.
Well, your security is more important than procedural niceties, so there's no issue here. I mentioned in my statement that the court has adopted a code of conduct, but without an enforcement mechanism, it's more aspirational than real. Is there any, and both you and Justice Comey, is there any attempts now to create a very effective enforcement system?
Want me to start? I guess I would start by saying I regard the Code of Ethics as more than aspirational. We've all 9 made a commitment to follow it, so I consider it binding on me. I would also say that we all draw on resources within the court to make sure, to help us to the end of discharging our ethical responsibilities. Whenever I have a question, I consult our legal counsel inside the court. On the question of enforceability, I mean, I think you've put your finger on what is a very difficult question. It's a complex question. It's one that we've talked about a lot as a conference, and I don't think it's one that we're entirely at rest on yet. And if I could just say a few words about some of the complexities. I mean, one is it's just tricky to figure out who would be the entity to enforce such a code. You know, sometimes people have floated the idea of an inspector general. Well, if that comes from the executive branch, to have someone from the executive branch inside the court supervising the court's work, well, that's a problem. It needs to come from within the judiciary. And then you have the awkwardness of, well, we review the work of other judges within the system, but then they would be sitting on the committee to review ethical complaints, and that creates its own awkwardnesses. So we've talked about the possibility of senior judges or retired judges, but then there's still a structural problem because then you need to have an appeal process. The way the lower courts work is they judge these things at the circuit court level, but then you can appeal it up to the judicial conference's committee on judicial conduct, and then up to the full judicial conference itself. So that mechanism would put, again, judges from lower courts reviewing our code. So I'm not saying that it would be impossible, you know, to have an enforcement mechanism, but I think it's been complicated to figure out exactly what that would be, given the position of the Supreme Court within our constitutional structure and within the judicial branch of government. But I do want to stress, Ranking Member Reed, that none of my colleagues, and certainly not I, think ourselves above the law or above ethics in any way.
And I want to say I agree with that. I come out in a somewhat, you know, I think for me, I'm not so much in flux on this issue. I have come to rest on the need for an enforcement mechanism if the enforcement mechanism is of the right kind. It's not because I think that we're ignoring the code of conduct. I do not think that at all. But it's important, I think, for public perception of the court. I think it's also important to give the justices a way to show that some of the charges against them are, you know, so much poppycock. And I completely agree with Justice Barrett that this cannot be something where the executive appoints somebody or Congress appoints somebody or has a particular role in the process. It has to come from within the judicial branch itself if the Supreme Court is to remain independent, and it's incredibly important that it remain independent. You know, I think that we can figure out a way around some of the complexities that Justice Barrett talked about using senior judges or retired judges to be our policemen, if you will. Even though I agree, it's a little bit of an awkward structure to have policemen for the judges who are at the apex of the branch. So agree with everything Justice Barrett said about the need to do this within the judiciary and the complexities of that. I would say we should find an enforcement mechanism.
Thank you. Just a final point, which is I think the court has not escaped the situation of every other branch of government, which is, according to polling from Pew, 48% of Americans have a favorable opinion of the Supreme Court. That's down from 70% 5 years ago. And I think putting in these types of institutional checks might give more confidence to the people that, you know, there's nothing wrong at the court. The other thing, though, it goes back to the initial points of these inflammatory statements made by public figures, politicians, et cetera, are not helpful to the court's prestige. I think we should recognize the court plays a unique and fundamental role, and we should respect that role. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here. I want to follow up. Senator Reid has touched two areas that I wanted to address, and one is the statements made by elected officials and others derogatory of judges, justices, and the court. Tomorrow we're considering Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche's nomination, who has said of the court that they are rogue activist judges and repeatedly claimed the administration is, quote, at war with the federal judiciary. That kind of rhetoric, I think, is unacceptable on either side of the table, Democrat or Republican, liberal, conservative. It just inflames people and has them thinking in terms of violence that may reach physical violence if we're not careful. So I want to just add the chorus that violence is unacceptable at any stage of the spectrum. Secondly, we had some terrible incidents in the Northern District of Illinois not that long ago, where one of the federal district court judges had a disgruntled person who appeared in that court, then went to her home and took the life of her mother and husband. It was a horrible incident that occurred. Since then, I've done my best to try to provide the resources, not just for that court, but for the courts across the country. And what I kind of eliciting your response, I think your position on Capitol Hill makes you a little different than most. But is it your impression, it is mine, that in speaking to district court judges, they often lament the fact that they're waiting for the GSA to respond to security measures in their courts, in their court buildings? We have a proposal that I'm working on which would allow the courts themselves to administer and work, monitor these funds to see if they can do it more quickly and professionally and thoroughly. Have you heard responses from other courtrooms around the country of security concerns that are gone unmet?
Yes, and I think that's part of their budget request. Judge Lefkoe is the judge I think you were talking about, and I served with her when I was on the Seventh Circuit. And I think precisely because of those sorts of things, yes, it is my understanding that the lower federal courts are also in great need of security funding and have been pushing for that in their courthouses and through GSA as well.
And we're in a bit of a different position because we don't use GSA. We're under the Capitol architect and have done very well with the architect of the Capitol, which that office has always been very attentive to our needs. But the lower federal courts are reliant on GSA, and I know have some significant concerns.
Very much so. And it's interesting, a few of the judges came to Capitol Hill to speak to members, and each time they would speak to one of the senators about the situation in their courthouses, they got the same response. Where do we sign up for going some different route, more efficient route, a quicker response when it comes to security? And I would just say, Mr. Chairman, that I think is going to fall in our jurisdiction here in the future, and I hope we take it seriously. I thank you both for being here today.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Bozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. We appreciate your service and sacrifice, not only you, but your families. These are certainly family endeavors, and again, we really do appreciate that. I had the opportunity to chair this committee several years ago, and during that time, it was well known that you all were perhaps the most efficient entity in government as far as taking care of your finances. I think we actually had you all send back some money on occasion, which is totally unheard of here. So we appreciate the fact that you do a good job in that regard regarding fiscal
We probably took
responsibility.
pride in that, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's an unusual thing that happens. So we do appreciate the fact that you're serving and the risks that you're taking. Let me ask you something that we haven't, I don't think, really gotten into, but right now, can you tell us if there are any barriers currently hindering the sharing of threat assessment and risk mitigation between the court police and outside agencies such as the marshals, Capitol Police, local police departments? Is all that working well?
I'm actually not certain about that, Senator Bozeman. We can have our staff get back to you with statistics about that. I don't know, do you have more knowledge?
I was just going to say that I think at least the relationship between the Supreme Court Police and the Capitol Police is excellent.
Yes.
And that they talk to each other all the time and they exchange information with each other. And I think that increases the effectiveness of both. So I think that that's a relationship that's on an at an extremely good place.
Good. Very
For the other ones, we're not sure.
Yeah.
No, and I was curious if they were doing, tactical training together or whatever, so.
We can get
That's-
you more information
Well,
on
and
that.
again, that's something we certainly would, be willing to help you with if that's not the case. Tell us about staffing. So many of our entities are various police departments throughout the country, you name it, and they're having trouble with staffing problems, attracting, the quality people that we'd like. Our law enforcement does a tremendous job, but that is an issue. Do you all see the same issue?
It's a challenging environment in which to hire police officers. There are fewer police officers than there is demand for police officers. And I know that the Capitol Police is experiencing that, and we're certainly experiencing that. So we're trying to ramp up, but in this environment where the supply is less than the demand. We've used various kinds of recruitment incentives. So we've tried to structure our pay in order to be to really compete well for police officers, and we try to ensure that we're the best possible place to work. And I think we're making great strides. So we really have increased our police force substantially, but we still have a ways to go to get it to where we want it to be. So it's still sort of foot on the gas, and this is not something that can be done overnight to get a quality police force. I think we're still looking for 100, 150 more officers, and that will take some time.
Very good. So tell us again, you have this fiscal year 27 request in, increased funding. Tell us how that request will increase security and make the court and your lives safer.
Sure, so I can take a crack at that. I mean, the items that we are hoping to fund through this 2027 fiscal year request are personnel is the biggest line item, and that would be for new officers in our dignitary protection unit and building security officers.
So that's the most pressing gap.
That is what the bulk of the money is for. That's 14.6. Okay. We would like another residential security office. We're running out of space inside the court building to house the new security officers that are staffing the residences. So that accounts for another $2 million. I'm going to put my glasses on here. 12 new cybersecurity experts to deal with the increasing threats to our court systems, which Chairman Haggerty mentioned before, and then annual inflationary increases, and that's about it. That gets us to about 14.
Very good. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, we appreciate your service and sacrifice. And I think you make a very compelling case, a great argument. You're in a different situation now. You're not hearing an argument. You're actually giving an argument. And I think so far you're doing very well.
Thank you, Senator Bozeman.
It's easier to be up there, though,
I don't know about that, Justice. Senator Kearns.
Thank you very much, Chairman Haggerty, and thank you, Justices, for being here. I served alongside Senator Bozeman on this exact subcommittee, and having previously served at the county level where security and protection for our courthouse was a part of my responsibilities, and having seen some really disturbing incidents at the state and local level and federally, I welcome this conversation. Senator Cornyn and I worked together to promptly introduce and get unanimously passed the Supreme Court Police Parity Act in 2022. And I have a couple of bills I want to talk about. But let me pick up where Senator Durbin left off and reference back my time on FSGG. The Judicial Conference described the condition of the federal judiciary's facilities as having reached a crisis point. And I'd say that's certainly true of the courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware, and asked Congress to create a separate judiciary building service that would transfer responsibility from the General Services Administration for the judiciary. I'd just be interested in what you think of this proposal and whether creating a new JBS would be preferable to reforming GSA, and whether assuming direct control over courthouse management might improve efficiency and reduce costs, or might be a needless burden on the federal judiciary.
I think we probably don't know enough about the specifics of the bills to be able to comment on that. I think we have heard, what we said before, frustration among federal judges about the current system. Exactly how it should be changed, I think we're not prepared to say.
We'd certainly welcome your input on it at some point, because I clerked for Judge Roth in a courthouse that, when I have visited recently, is exactly the same.
Yeah.
And with the same security challenges that it had 40 years ago. The primary role, Justice Barrett, of the Marshal Service is to protect the federal judiciary and the federal court system and to enforce federal court orders. But it's housed within the executive branch in the Department of Justice and is overseen by the Attorney General. Your court's already moved away from Marshal Service protection, as we've discussed, to build a Supreme Court police department answerable to the court. Do you think other federal courts should also follow suit? Should Congress move the Marshal Service out of DOJ and into the Article III branch? And do you think the judiciary's reliance on the executive branch for security and enforcement of orders creates any separation of powers concerns?
I think that's another one on which we're probably not prepared to opine. I mean, I think what I will say is I thought, as the Seventh Circuit judge, and during my confirmation process, the U.S. Marshal Service gave me great protection. And, you know, when they were outside of our homes, we were all really grateful for the Marshal Service being there. You know, on the broader separation of powers question that you pose, I'm honestly not sure, and I don't know whether the lower courts are asking for that as well, to have in-house security and to be free of the Marshal Service. That strikes me as a more complex question that I'm not sure we could express a view about.
And I do think my question had two components. One was Marshal Service as protection for federal courts and federal court officials. Mm-hmm. The other was the enforcement of court orders. We haven't seen any problem with that recently, right. But it struck me as a question well worth your input to the extent you're comfortable. For state and local courts, Senator Cornyn and I have a Countering Threats and Attacks on Our Judges Act, which would establish a state judicial threat intelligence and resource center, because frankly, state and local judges, many of whom have faced threats and a number of whom have tragically been killed, they don't have the intelligence sharing and the coordinated and professional protection resources the federal judiciary does. Yeah. And I know you're not going to opine on a piece of legislation, but I just, could you help give me any input on what you've learned about how security concerns can affect a judge's ability to make sound legal judgments? How important is the physical security of the judiciary at the state and local level to the independence and strength of our judiciary nationally?
Gosh. Senator Coons, it's so, I mean, I'm glad to hear that you're focusing on this with Senator Cornyn, because I think it's critically important. Yes. For one thing, you're not going to attract the kind of people who you want serving in any of these positions at the state or federal level if they feel like the security of them and their families will suffer. And so just the ability to deliver the kind of justice that we hope that our courts can provide will suffer. And then I do think that judges at both the state and federal level are holding strong despite intimidation and threats, and I think that's a tribute to our constitutional system. However, I don't know what to say about what might happen if somebody were really persistently being threatened and harassed in that kind of way. So I think we need to have our courts be able to operate independently and safely.
I've lived in other countries. I serve on the Foreign Relations Committee, and I'm directly familiar with instances where physical threats to the families of justices and judges change the outcome of important decisions in other countries. And I won't impugn any country by reference, but it's not unheard of globally. And I think we need to guard against that happening here. Again, Senator Cornyn and I, we've been prolific. Got signed into law. The Courthouse Ethics and Transparency Act, or CETA, was signed in 2022. And this followed an investigation that found 130 federal judges failed to recuse themselves from matters involving parties where they held a financial interest. And it covers the whole federal judiciary, including justices. They're required to publicly publish annual disclosures and submit periodic transaction reports for significant security trades, just as members of Congress do. The justices are in compliance. But we have a serious compliance issue across the rest of the federal judiciary. Only a quarter of judges' disclosures were posted on the timeline required in statute, and we're still waiting for more than 200 disclosures from 2024. CETA is a requirement, not a suggestion, Justice Kagan. Why do you think so many judges in the federal court system are having difficulty complying? And does the judiciary need additional resources or clarification to help ensure compliance?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer to that is. For sure, you're right, Senator Coons, that compliance is of great importance in this area. And I'm glad you said that we are in compliance.
I checked before I asked.
And, I'm not sure what your bill does, so I'm not going to be able to comment on your bill. But there's no question that every judge should be in compliance with those requirements.
The version that applies to Congress has a financial penalty when your disclosure is not submitted on time. The version applying to the judiciary does not. And I wondered if you thought we should harmonize the legislation.
That I'll take a pass on.
Last point I'll make.
I just want to say, like Justice Barrett, I think it's great that you and Justice Cornyn are pursuing these, are taking seriously the threats to the judiciary, the threats to the rule of law, how we can make sure that the judiciary is as fine as it can be.
I'd welcome any follow-up that the Judicial Conference or that the court wants to make on a number of those points. Last, I'll just reference you had a robust discussion about a ethics code, about the mandatory ethics code, and I appreciate that you're committed to enforcement and that you are recognizing the challenges within the hierarchy of Article 3. But I do think, just speaking for myself, that there is a genuine appearance issue. And I would urge you to work diligently to find a way to deliver a judicially created but effective enforcement mechanism so that some of the transparency and ethics concerns that have been raised about the court can be addressed. I'm the vice chair of the Ethics Committee in the Senate, and I think the fact that there is an enforceable ethics code that applies to every senator and Senate staff, and that we on occasion take publicly known and much more frequently not known actions is an important part of trying our best to preserve confidence in the institutions of our government. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you, Senator Coons. We've been joined by the ranking member, Senator Murray. You are recognized.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you both, Justice Barrett, Justice Kagan, for being here today. We appreciate it. Like everyone, I really respect the separation of powers and the importance of an impartial and independent Supreme Court. So it is important for all of us on this committee to fulfill our responsibility to oversee taxpayer dollars. So I just want you to know I really appreciate both of you being here and participating in this hearing. I do have several questions for both of you about the court's budget and operations. But before I go to that, I do want to say I'm very troubled that the current president challenges and has challenged our system of checks and balances in very unprecedented ways. And the court has made some incredibly consequential decisions without any real process or explanation by relying on the shadow docket. And it's also unbelievably important to the functioning of our democracy that we have a well-functioning, independent judiciary that is trusted by the people of this nation. That requires transparency, and it requires the American people to be able to know you are calling balls and strikes and not making decisions based on any financial conflict of interest and what is behind those decisions. So I urge you to keep those issues in mind, and if either of you have any comments on that, particularly on the shadow hearings, I would appreciate it. Justice Kagan?
Sure. This is something that we there are many facets to the shadow docket, and we discuss them and debate them and sometimes disagree about them. In recent years, we have increasingly received these requests to move fast and to move before a case winds its way through all the levels of review. We have to decide what to do with those requests. We argue about the standards to be used. We argue about how those standards apply in particular cases. Sometimes Justice Barrett and I have agreed. Sometimes Justice Barrett and I have disagreed. I think for myself, what the court is doing better on, but is not completely there on, is even when we feel as though a earlier decision is appropriate, finding ways to incorporate greater process into our decision of those cases. So have oral arguments, have more briefing, make sure to explain ourselves in our decisions more than we did at, maybe a year or 18 months ago when we first started being swamped with these applications. I think we can still improve what we're doing. I think you're exactly right that transparency is important, that people need to know, lower court judges need to know, litigants need to know, the public needs to do what it is that we're deciding and why. There are occasions where emergency relief is absolutely appropriate. And it's finding those occasions, but no others, that is the challenge of this.
Okay, I appreciate that response, and don't know if you have anything to add.
Oh, I'll just add one thing. I think one of the challenges, as we're trying to adapt and respond to the number and character of applications that we receive, I think one of the challenges is on our merits docket, we have a very well-established process for handling cases, and each case is treated the exact same way, the same deadlines, the same briefing limits, oral argument, et cetera. And as Justice Kagan alluded to, it's a little bit different with these emergency applications because I don't think any of us takes the position that we should have an opinion written for every one of them or oral argument for every one of them. So it's not quite the same one-size-fits-all process on the emergency docket that we have on the merits docket. And so I think what we're working on now is figuring out which ones do warrant that more process, the oral argument, more briefing, and which ones should be handled in-house, which ones warrant more explanation, which ones really should be just an order. And I think that has been something that we're just working through.
Well, I encourage you strongly to work through that and make it clear. I think, especially at this time, whether it comes to trust or transparency or truthfulness, the public needs to know, and I think you need to recognize that this is a serious question that many of our constituents have. So please continue your work and reach a goal that I think everybody would support you on. So thank you. Now, on your budget request, this committee does take security threats facing the Supreme Court and everyone who signed up to serve the public extremely seriously. That's exactly why Congress provided $58 million in additional security funding in FY26 to address some of these increased threats and vulnerabilities. Unfortunately, however, the court made a request for over half of this funding at the very last minute without any public explanation or justification of the need for that funding after we had already provided $28 million in the continuing resolution last fall. So I just want to ask both of you, will you commit to making public all relevant budget request documents in the future, including for any unanticipated supplemental funding needs?
Absolutely. We want to be transparent, and Justice Kagan had apologized to Ranking Member Reed on the court's behalf if we did anything that was suboptimal in our seeking of those funds. They were in response. We made those requests in response to unexpected needs, like the premature, we didn't expect the marshals to drop residential security as quickly as they did, and they told us that they were going to end it 6 months before we anticipated it. That was one of the big line item reasons for seeking that extra money. So it's my understanding that our staff was transparent with the committee about what the money was being spent on, but absolutely, we want to cooperate and we recognize your important role.
Okay, I think that's really important for you to understand and make sure that we have that documentation. Our constituents require us to be very transparent about where their tax dollars go, and we need that budget information from you. And we want to make sure the court has first-rate security, but we do have very little information about how you are actually building this type of security capacity that you need. So standing up your own police and residential security is not an easy task. How long do you think it will take to be fully staffed and operational? And secondly, what expertise are you relying on to make sure your security personnel have the facilities and the training and the capacity they need?
What we think, we have a goal of 477 police officers. We're a ways away from that right now. If we include people we get through contracting, we can probably do it within a couple of years. But in order to have our own employees get up to that mark, then we're probably talking more like 6 years, into the 2030s. As to what kind of training is being used, I think we're going to have to unless Justice Barrett knows more than I do, I think we're going to have to provide you with further information about that. I'm confident that the kind of training programs that we've put in place are good ones, but I can't give you a whole lot of detail about that.
Okay, that is something that we need to have in order to provide the budget for you, so we would appreciate that back. And finally, I just have a few seconds left. I heard Senator Coons, when I come in, talk about code of ethics, and I just want to reiterate that. As my colleagues have pointed out, that code is self-enforced, and it is a weaker code of conduct than one all the lower courts have been held to. For example, it essentially allows justices to decide for themselves whether or not they are engaging in a political activity or accepting inappropriate gifts. I know you've been asked at this both in the House, and a number of people here have mentioned it, but I want to add my name and voice to the fact that we need, and our constituents need, to know that you have a code of ethics, that you are held to high standards, because that again is about transparency, and it is about returning confidence to the court decisions that are being made. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Husted, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair Fisher. To the justices, thank you very much for being here today. You debated whether it's better to be on that side or on this side, and I will tell you, as having been a petitioner before the court in 2018, it's much better to be on this side. And I think that you've made a strong case for your security, the funding for your security requests. I think we all have a growing concern about security issues with the court, justifiably so. I hope that we will get a budget done and we will get an appropriations bill passed and settle on these top-line discussions so that it doesn't set the stage for another government shutdown. So I'm hopeful that this is one of the many issues that we can get agreement on and get a bill passed. In talking about any problem, I always try to look at the root cause. What is the root cause of the problem that we're trying to address? And I know that issues regarding fiery rhetoric through venues like social media have been attributable to some of the increased security threats. So I was wondering as well, have you seen any of these threats from the information you have as organized threats, either domestically or internationally, that would lead to some of these increased security threats? And Justice Kagan, I'll start with you. Justice Coney Barrett, please follow up if you have any thoughts.
Our sense of the threats is that it's more lone actors. But perhaps...
I think that's one that our staff, if you would like more information in a SCIF or a private meeting, because I think they do know some things about some of the sources of the threats, but probably not something we should say in a public setting.
Okay. I appreciate that, and we will follow up and try to get more information on that, because I think it could help further make the case for why this is an important issue. In the cases of these security cases and the threats and things like that, do you believe that they're intentionally designed to intimidate you, to alter or change the opinions of the court?
It's hard to see how some of them are not designed to do precisely that. I think they're designed to intimidate or designed maybe to punish after decisions, that the person sending the threat didn't like, as a warning not to do it in the future. It's hard to interpret, particularly those anonymous deliveries that are sent in the name of Judge Salas's murdered son, as anything other than an attempt to intimidate and influence decisions.
The issue on the Dobbs opinion that was leaked, are we any closer to knowing how that happened? And are you satisfied with the efforts to find out how that leak occurred?
Well, we did a serious internal investigation and could not come to a conclusion about that issue. And it's not that we've closed the books on it. If we get any further information, we will pursue it till the end. And I know that the marshal of a court who was in charge of that investigation feels that that is her responsibility. As to whether it will happen, I don't know.
Okay. We know this is one of the responsibilities I think we all have as public officials is to watch our rhetoric and how we describe things, and it certainly hasn't gotten better. There's no doubt about that, and the words that people choose can be very inflammatory. But also the words that are sometimes chosen in judicial opinions have seemingly, to me, grown rather inflammatory on occasion, and not necessarily with the Supreme Court, but at all levels of the courts. Are you concerned about that? Is there any discussion about the words that are used in coming up with legal opinions that may indeed contribute to the problem?
I think that, all justices and judges write their own opinions. I would say, speaking for, myself and my sense of how judges think about this generally is that our goal is to disagree about ideas without crossing the line into the personal. And in my own experience and the experience of the judges with whom I've served, I think that is a line that judges try not to cross, because one thing I think that the courts, not just the Supreme Court, but courts generally can model for the public is the way to have disagreements that can be very serious about weighty issues and that can be sharp, but that avoid descending into that kind of unhelpful rhetoric that gets very personal.
That is exactly the way I feel about it. When I dissent, especially in an important case in which I care about a great deal and other people do as well, I want it to be a strong dissent. I want it to be a pointed dissent. I want people to understand why it is that I'm taking the trouble to dissent, but I don't want it to be a personal dissent. I don't want to do anything that is ad hominem with respect to my colleagues. And, people can make mistakes.